Greetings, dear listeners and watchers. You are tuning into Horror Nerds at Church, a ridiculously queer podcast where we take a deep dive into a horror film and talk about how it connects to queerness, religion, and theology. I'm Pastor Emily, and I am the snow that saves the whole thing from utter chaos.
Beautiful. I do love a good snow. I'm Pace, and I am the look of utter ennui that Tilda Swinton has as she holds her skinny cigarette just staring at the screen for long stretches in this film. Susanna, your turn.
Oh, it's my turn. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm Susanna, and I am.
The bloody toes of all the dancers.
That's actually what I was thinking. So I feel like you kind of read my mind, and I am ballet-related injuries. That is. I still have ballet-related injuries.
And I'm John, and I am the chicken wing Madame Blanc devours.
Yes. Love it. Follow us on Patreon at patreon.com/horrornerds@church. It's only $5 to sign up. And dropping this month on Patreon, you will get everything we've been promising the last few months, but haven't uploaded yet, which is Doctor Who BooTube, Matilda movie commentary, The Witches, so much more. And almost all of it's already recorded. I just need to have a break from my dissertation to get this stuff uploaded.
And if you are listening to this episode on your favorite podcast provider, happy whatever month it is, because we're waiting to do that until the dissertation stuff is done. But please check the show notes for any content warnings for this episode. It's a bizarre one. And you can also find links to all the books we mention on our bookshop.org store. And for everyone watching or listening, check the show notes for links to our newsletter, merch store, and Patreon.
I love
I think
Pace, by the way, that you have your pen like this for listeners. As Pace was talking about having the lit cigarette, they have the pen from their dissertationing in their hands, very franche.
Yeah. I'm channeling my Madame Blanc. But I also think we need to start repping our letterbox more. So also follow us on Letterbox. Emily has one. I have one. The podcast has one. We're all
I just
over there.
updated mine today with this movie.
That's so weird. I actually downloaded it today.
I love it.
Perfect.
Well, we are joined by a very special guest. So John Potter, you've already heard him introduce himself as the chicken wing. He is a writer-editor based in St. Paul, Minnesota. He is the content editor of Living Lutheran, the magazine of the ELCA, an Enneagram Type 9. Interesting. And best of all, a lifelong horror fan. He especially values the genre's unique potential to grapple with religious and theological themes, confront unjust history and social constructions, and center marginalized voices. Some of the same reasons I love horror too. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. Big fan of the show.
Sweet. Yay. We love our fans. I have a few announcements to just quick run through. First, we mentioned last episode that we have a new segment coming called Politics Nerds at Church. It'll just be a segment around our announcements time to talk about any kind of political stuff and our feelings, opinions, or any action items that we might be able to suggest or recommend and things. So I'll start next episode. There's some Facebook drama going on with their live videos. So if our lives might start disappearing from our Facebook after a few weeks or after a month. If that happens, you can always check us out on YouTube. Our videos are up there. And of course, the audio is always on our audio feeds.
Indeed.
And
also,
then
that news dropped today.
Yes.
So if you're upset about it, feel free to voice your concerns for whatever good that may or may not do.
To Facebook. You can voice them to us and we'll agree with you, but I don't think we can particularly do much about that.
No, but we might share them. I mean, you could send us emails, angry emails. We'd take them all. I don't think we've ever gotten any angry emails.
I know.
The franchise, the whole
Yeah.
Diakonia.faith podcasting franchise has, but that was angry emails from Pace to Nerds at Church. So
Yeah.
I don't
So
think
I do not write angry emails to my own podcast. But we have gotten some like queer phobic and transphobic and gross comments every now and again on the
Mm.
socials, so those get deleted and blocked. But
yeah.
no emails, thankfully.
Yeah. Also,
Well,
the big news. I don't know if you
yeah,
can
the
hear
big
the drum
news
roll
is
did on my table.
tonight, as soon as this podcast is over, I just need to finish my bibliography, and then I am sending my dissertation with all the revisions from my advisor to my committee tonight in
Yay.
preparation for my defense on March 14th. So that's coming up fast. But
You're defending on Athena's birthday. I think we've already talked about this.
yes, we have. And the day before I end my employment at the church that laid me off.
Oh, didn't
Fun
know about
times,
that.
right?
Mm.
So yeah, but anyway, that means that you'll be getting some podcast stuff to your audio feeds, and Patreons will be getting Patreon stuff
Mm-hmm.
to their Patreon feeds, and all that stuff will be happening. Especially probably this coming week because I'm going to need to put my anxious energy into something that is not my dissertation.
Yay.
So stay tuned for that. So that's the big news in my life. What's going on with everybody else? And also, always shout out what you've been reading, watching, listening to, anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to go first, John, as our guest?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, we were talking about this a little before we started recording, but um, I'm a big fan of the Ghost Stories for Christmas series that the BBC has been running for like decades. And I've kind of seen a couple here and there over the years. There's some that are more sort of renowned in horror film circles, but they've been notoriously kind of hard to find. And Shudder, which is like my favorite streaming service, put them all, or not all of them, but a lot of them up this last Christmas. So, we're well past Christmas season, but I'm still going through them and they've been bringing me a lot of joy. So I highly recommend the Ghost Stories at Christmas. Some of they like vary in levels of scariness. Like some of them are kind of cozy, um, won't bother you too much. Some of them are pretty disturbing. So yeah, but check those out.
Yeah.
Nice.
I've only watched three, but I'm
Okay.
excited to watch the rest. I too have Shudder, and so do Susanna and Emily because we all
Yeah,
have it and don't share passwords.
Ah,
not at all.
nice.
So sharing passwords. Mm.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
Yeah.
Mhm. I have not seen that, but I finished the book Fire, which is the second book in the Graceling series, which is a reread for me. It is one of my absolute favorite series. And I just started today Bitter Blue, which is the third one. I probably won't reread the whole series because Kristen Kishore has a new book out. But I'm actually reading, which is the big thing about this. I like the pandemic has had the pandemic and then the horrors that persist and all of that stuff had a big impact on my ability to read for fun.
Mm.
So I've actually restarted that and am actually like keeping up with it, which is exciting. So I'm working on Bitter Blue, but also, and I have Pulpit Supply in DC all this coming month. And so I will have plenty of opportunities to continue on Braiding Sweetgrass, which I'm listening to on audiobook on my drives back. Um, but watching wise, I just watched another story in my Doctor Who watch through because I'm way slower than Pace um, at that. And John Oliver is back, which he is a cishet white guy. But like as far as cishet white guys go, like pretty solid. And I was really grateful for the YouTube for the TikTok video song that he introduced us to on his first episode. Um, that we can probably share in the show notes, but it's fantastic because it's all about like, oh, forget how it goes. This is a mid.
We're in the middle of a hostile
Hostile
government takeover.
There you go.
Yeah, that's it. I was like, I know it's really catchy, and this guy just like made it up when he was getting ready for work, and then somebody like lots of people have remixed it. It's fantastic.
That's awesome.
So I love that. Also, I've been watching Love Is Blind with Susanna.
Minneapolis season.
Right.
Yeah. The drama, Minneapolis. What are you Lutherans doing?
I don't know. I've heard people say this season is Love is Bland. I don't know.
I mean,
Oh no,
it is Lutheran.
it is classic white Midwestern.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You know, where everybody's super nice and not even remotely problematic at
Right.
first.
Right.
And they
right.
don't talk about any of the important shit
Mhm.
before they propose marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
I have-
little on the money.
Yeah, I have to say, I never understood ELCA polity until I moved to the Midwest. And I was like, oh, it makes so much sense now. But coming from the East Coast and then living the West Coast, and now I'm here, I'm like, oh, that's how stuff happens.
Well, if any of you want to write, a piece on how our ELCA polity is reflected in Love is Blind, feel free to pitch it.
I
That'd be
mean, I
amazing.
would pitch a piece on Love Is Blind and the ELCA.
There's something there.
There's a lot
Okay.
there. There was a lot there. I mean, like just the episode of Britney who came out that she was bisexual, and then all of a sudden, like, the one that she was interested in was like, yeah, this isn't gonna work out, and nobody thought that was shitty, and it was very. It was
Yeah, as soon as that happened, he started dropping some like evangelical speak that I was like, I know what's going on with this guy.
Yeah.
It's a bummer.
I still
yeah.
have
Right in line
suspicions
with
about
your-
Ben. You know, I get it. You're watching. Are you watching, John?
My spouse is mainly watching, but I'm kind of dipping in and
Ooh,
out.
And you get sucked in. I've
Yeah, I
done that
do.
to people. Yeah,
I've
yeah,
gotten sucked in.
yeah, totally.
That's-
And the one Ben, like honestly, my current like idea is that Ben and Sarah with the big gay sister, who's like, I'm just screening everybody to make sure they're cool with queer people. Like, I feel like Sarah's gonna be a late in life lesbian, and Ben is gonna be a late in life cis gay. Ben has these things about him, these mannerisms, like you might see, and I'm just like, oh, these two. But Ben is so deeply ingrained in the evangelical community, and so he's like, when she's like, so are you okay with queer people? And he's like, he never actually says queer or LGBTQIA or anything like that. He's like, that community, that way, I don't have a problem with them. Like, can't name them in a way that he's like tripping over something. So I really feel like they give me the vibe of like the besties that I had in high school that ended up
Then all
being
turned out
super
queer.
gay. Me too. And it was like, well, we're so close, we must be in love, right? Now, so I mean, I feel like there's a horror coming down the stream on that one, and I'm very excited about it. Sorry,
Yeah.
so I guess you know
apology
now what.
rejected.
Guess you now know what
But-
I'm watching.
You just gave us an excellent transition, though. Go, Susanna. Oh my goodness.
okay. Well,
We have such a bad track record with transitions, but then we have a good one, and I'm ruining it by talking about it.
That's how we do it. That's how we do
I
transitions
I
every
think
time.
you need to have a pen in your hand every live at Beam Out of Blog because it works
If
so
we ever
well.
do a live on, The Shining, we already had an episode on The Shining. If we ever do a live something with it, I'll make sure to do this for that too, to mimic Shelley Duvall's
Or 101
Shining.
Oh, yeah.
Dalmatians. If we do an
It's really too
animal,
good.
if we do an animal horror season, probably we won't be able to use Susanna as our tech because animal horror does not seem like her thing. But 101 Dalmatians, you could do it.
That's true.
There you go.
Yeah, I
There you
can't.
go.
I like the doesthedogdie.com website is like
Yeah.
very
Which,
near and dear to my heart. Like, I need to know all the things.
Hmm.
shout out,
beforehand.
we love our Does the Dog Die. Just go doesthedogdie.com. And we kind of recommend that if you're like along with Emily, kind of being more introduced to horror through our podcast, it's a good way to kind of check to see what stuff
Yeah.
might be in the
Yeah.
movie
There
we're
was
talking
one
about
time
before.
that the answer was yes.
Mhm.
That's happened probably
Last
2
season.
times.
I just
3
wish I would
times,
have
something
found
like
it before I Am Legend, because I Am
Mm.
Legend wrecked
Right.
me.
It's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
We-
Wrecked me. Also, John, I am the
Whoops.
proud pupper mom of German Shepherds, so it
Okay.
like doubly wrecked me.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. I have a French bulldog, and there hasn't been a French bulldog horror story yet, but maybe at some
Yeah,
point.
but isn't John Wick
Yeah.
close?
That's
It's
true.
some little
It's,
dog.
adjacent. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Nah.
John Wick kind of like, I mean, that was the only one I could take, but that's because there was severe vengeance.
Right. Yeah. It's all based around that happening.
Right?
I'm really
I wanna
okay
do
with
it-
body horror if there's vengeance for an animal or like or civil rights. Like the one if
Yeah.
you haven't seen it, please watch The Wrath of Becky, John, because it is divine.
It's so good.
Okay. Oh, I don't know it. I got to check it out.
I
It
think
is
it's
just
streaming on Paramount, maybe?
Okay.
Plus
so
Paramount Plus.
I know I kind of ruined the transition, but that's what I'm watching. I'm watching that.
No, we all did.
and
That's the
and I'm
point.
watching and I'm watching School Spirit still because
Ah,
is so
yes,
good.
yes.
it's so good.
And
And
then we're watching Life Yellow Jackets.
that's what, now you ruined my transition. And Yellow Jackets are back, and I'm so excited because horror is teen girls in the 90s. It is my jam. It is such a throwback
Yeah.
for me. I don't know what's going on there. That show is fantastic. It is so woo. But I love the like constant like is what I love about how it toes the line between is there a supernatural horror situation going on, or are these people just like literally delusional, like literally like do the woods make people have hallucinations? Is it really just life? Is it just being a lesbian? Is it just eating your friends? Will these things make you crazy, or are they like how
Right.
much what is what? And I really appreciate that towing the line. It's really interesting. You can't tell if
It's
there's
true. It's
actually
such
something in the
a
woods.
question.
Or...
Is eating your friends going to make you is eating your friends going to drive you insane? Or are you eating your friends because it's already happened?
Yeah,
Or,
What if both
Spoilers.
actually false binary?
it's
or
really good.
is anything in this movie happening we're going to talk about? And that was really bad. We're going to be talking about Suspiria, the 2018, whatever it is, in relation to the first one. But before we do this, we asked this question of all of our guests. Do you have, John, a real life church horror story?
Way to bring us back, Pace.
Yeah. Good job. No, I think you're right, though, that we were touching on the particular brand of horror in church that is the Upper Midwest version, which is a lot of passive aggression and playing things internally until there's an explosion, etc. So admittedly, that's something I am continually working on as well. But yeah, when I was thinking of what kind of could be a succinct kind of experience for this, I kind of grew up with one foot in the main line and one foot in the evangelical world always. And it was, I grew up Episcopalian, and then I've worked for the ELCA for the last 9 years or so. But a lot of that stretch in the middle, I was a member of the Evangelical Covenant Church. And I went to the only Covenant Church high school and college, which shaped me in a lot of ways. And I don't think most of the folks who were there when I was a student, which would have been the early 2000s, would have even really identified it as evangelical. Like now that I know more about church, I guess I would, but it was not, a particularly theologically or politically conservative school. We always thought of it as being pretty progressive within the sort of spectrum of Christian schools. And for a long time, there were issues like there were across the mainland at the time that were kind of simmering in the background, but not really dealt with. And so I think the assumption that myself and a lot of my friends had and students at the time were like that the church was on its way to becoming affirming, and was sort of a, we were talking about like polity earlier. Like I think there was a real, it's kind of up to the congregation to decide. And so I think there were those of us who were like, oh yeah, we've already had that conversation and our church is affirming at least. But then you kind of realize the more that the issues brought to the forefront, like, oh wait, am I totally wrong about this?
Mhm.
And so there was a really awful kind of culmination of that, which is that Judy Howard Peterson, who is the campus pastor at my college, which was North Park University in Chicago, um, performed a same-sex wedding and was ultimately fired by the school and removed of her credentials by the denomination. And that was around the same time that a lot of congregations were getting kicked out of the denomination for not only like performing weddings or having discussions around queer folks becoming members, but like talking about whether to become affirming. So it was this really um, like kind of traumatic, and I'm saying this as a cishet person. Obviously, it wasn't affecting me in the way that it was affecting a lot of my friends, but it tore this church that I did care about apart. And it was this, they had a chance to kind of uh, go one way or the other, and they really doubled down and dug in their heels on this issue. And now they're more conservative than ever before. Like I think a lot of churches have become in the last, whatever, 10, 15 years. But yeah, it was, if ever there was like a moment when I was like, I've kind of had one foot in that world still, even though there's things I am troubled by, like that was my clean break from evangelicalism.
Yeah.
And it's a shame because there's a lot of people like that pastor and like a lot of other pastors who've since been removed of their credentials who are like the future of the church in a lot of ways, who like had followings and were younger and passionate about justice, and just yeah, just to see that so firsthand, and how much it uh, damaged a lot of people into never wanting to be a part of any kind of church, or even having a faith that they could wrap their head around. It was a really tough moment, and obviously the main line has its own problems, and there's plenty of issues to contend with, in the ELCA and other churches as well. But um, I'm at least grateful that there was that kind of moment of clarity for the church where they um, didn't go that way. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's probably a little longer than I meant it to be, but that's kind of my immediate horror story.
You don't have to just do it for a minute. That's,
Sure.
I mean, I think that's real. I was reading something today, probably on Blue Sky, but it was somebody talk or Facebook on, but it was a queer person talking to two cishet colleagues who were all like in the same geographic area, probably I think town, but there was like someone anonymous, and they were the colleagues were talking about like joining in the pride festivities and stuff, and they're like, well, you should probably be there because we don't have a lot of credence as to cishets, which like true. But the queer pastor then was like, I don't think my church is ready to be there. Like, I don't think we're there yet. I think we still have work to do before we can go show up at Pride. And the cishet colleagues were like, I mean, the worst that can happen is some people get mad and grumble and leave. And the queer pastor was like,
Hmm.
the worst that can happen
Hmm.
is queer people show up and are harmed.
Hmm.
And it's that sort of thing, like, what perspective do we have when we're doing this? And like, I appreciate that, like, that clarity of, oh, this is not where my loyalties lie. This is not what the gospel calls
Mhm.
us to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of people, myself included, kind of spent time being like, well, I can change it from within. And it's like, how much do you want to spend your energy on that versus just being like, fuck that. Like, I'm
Yeah.
ready to
Right?
put my energy
Exactly.
somewhere else.
I mean, hello, I'm a pastor in the ELCA.
Right. Yeah. I know you understand more than I even do.
But yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to figure out where that balance is of where you're called to change within and where you're called to leave
Mm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
fits.
And how we exemplify that on this podcast. Like I did leave
Mm.
candidacy
Mhm.
potentially and stuff. So
And yet,
Mm.
which one of us is currently employed by a church?
I know it's the ironies of this podcast. Um,
It's true.
but yeah, no, that's so too often the story though. And it's
Yeah.
just sad that's kind of like a repeating
Yeah.
horror story within the
Mhm.
church.
Yeah.
Um, but it's people, like, yeah,
Mhm.
it's always gonna be messy.
Mhm. Yep. The opportunity to kind of um, stake your position one way or the other has unfortunately so many churches have drawn those lines in the sand that there's no kind of going back from.
Yeah,
They might change at some point, but it was they made a definitive choice, and I think people kind of adjusted from there. Anyway,
right.
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
thank you. That was good. That was
Mhm.
awesome. I mean, horrific and awesome,
right.
but
Yeah,
yes, all the
that was
Yeah,
a
things.
very on point horror story.
yeah.
Yes,
Thanks for letting me share.
of course. Well, from that, we're going to talk about another kind of horror of community in this movie, Suspiria, directed
There you
by
go.
Luca. Yeah, see, I kind of landed that
Got
one.
those
That was
Directed
good.
transitions.
by
Hey.
Thanks. But directed by Luca Guadagnino. Came out in 2018. And that, if we can go back in time to 2018, pre-COVID-19 pandemic, and imagine going to the theaters and seeing,
I've seen so many of these. I'm so excited.
right? Seeing Black Panther, A Wrinkle in Time, Ready Player One, Avengers Infinity War. I mean, you can kind of remember the year just from naming all the Marvel movies that came out in that year.
Right.
That's a new
It's true.
kind
It's
of
true.
marker of time in cinema. Deadpool 2, Solo, which we covered last season on Patreon, Ocean's 8, Incredibles 2, Jurassic World, Fallen Kingdom, uh, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, A Star is Born, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Mary Poppins Return, and a movie from a franchise we don't talk about because the author is a turf came out that as
Mm.
well.
I was like, what is that? What is
Yeah, FB2
FB2?
is how I have it in our notes.
Mm.
But then
9.
we
I've seen 9 of those.
see, right? And then there's
Technically
also
10,
an
but we don't talk about Bruno.
yeah, right. Uh and then in the horror realm, I mean, we define all these things so loosely. Why do I even say them differently? But anyway, Insidious: The Last Key came out. 50 Shades Free, I'm intentionally placing horror. A Quiet Place, The First Purge, Hotel Transylvania 3, which we covered the first one in our third season. The Meg, The Nun, The Predator, which we covered
Yes.
last season for Patreon. The House with the Clock in Its Walls, and Goosebumps 2, both kind of like family-friendly horror with Jack Black. And then Halloween 2018, which we covered in season 1 of this podcast.
Have we done movie commentaries on the No, we did Halloween 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've
Season of
seen
the
Halloween
Witch.
3 as a movie.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the one we did for this season, our movie
Mm.
commentary back in October.
It's true.
So, what is the what is your first memory of seeing this movie? Did you see it in theaters? Did you see it at home, renting?
I don't think I saw it in the theater. I saw it right. I don't think I did. I don't know. It's all a wonderful blur now. Um, I think I saw it pretty much as soon as it was available to stream or rent or whatever. I am a huge fan of the original, and I love its visuals and color palette, and has all
Yeah.
an all-time score that the band Goblin that did it. I got to see them perform it live like
So jealous.
15 years ago, maybe, and it was really awesome. So, it's kind of a revered movie for me. And so when I heard
Yeah.
about a remake, I was dubious, but I think remakes can be worth doing if the approach is really different. And this one really recontextualizes the story, and it's kind of socio-political themes and mythology, and it has a
Yeah.
totally different aesthetic. It's much more kind of drab and dreary. The score is, that awesome Tom York score that this new one has. Um, but it's a really different kind of score, and then the ending and meaning is totally different too. So I saw it and kind of didn't know what to make of it the first time I
Yeah.
watched it because it's so much and there's so many ideas and it goes in so many directions and it's really long and I like all of those things about it, but I think it was just more challenging than maybe I expected.
Yeah.
And rewatching it again, I only saw it a second time for getting ready for the pod, and I liked it much more this time. It really kind of clicked into place for me. But that's my background with it.
Yeah. I love that.
I, surprising absolutely no one, saw this movie for the first time for this episode.
Yeah.
Yep.
However, I have previously seen the original Suspiria, mostly because we watched it for this podcast in a previous season, in I believe season 4.
Yes.
Um, I think that if I were to watch this movie again, it would fall into place, like you're saying, John. However, I only watched this on the Saturday pace. I think we
I
watched
think
it.
so. Yeah, we watched it
I
Saturday.
only watched this on Saturday, and I had not recovered from the disturbing nature of it
Yeah.
in order to rewatch it before this episode.
Yeah.
So I have only watched it once.
Yeah,
It
that's a good
seems
point.
like
Like it is
no,
a
go ahead.
disturbing film.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think the like 7 year gap that I had in between viewings is maybe like a perfect amount of time to let it kind of sit in your brain, but not have it be super fresh. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds right.
Yeah,
What about you,
it's an experience. I saw it so when it came out, it was announced it was going to be released through Amazon Prime. And so I think I saw it on that first. But I remember getting to it like a little bit late just because I was a doctoral student in the midst of classes at the time. So like I don't think I saw it till a few months after it came out, in other words, but I do remember a conversation around it from the members of the church I worked at who saw it thinking it would be something else,
Hmm.
being very like confused by it and not liking it. So I kind of went into it with that perception and then being surprised that even though the first viewing I had no idea what was going on, um, like, but being surprised it wasn't it being surprised, I think, in a good way that made me curious to watch it again. And so I
Mm,
watched it. This is probably my third time watching it. The second time, I think, is the one kind of like you were saying, John, where I it's like, oh, I really like this.
Mhm.
And then this time I will say, because I was texting Emily as we were watching it, is I said, uh, wow, how does this movie still have another 2 hours? Wow, how does this movie still have an hour? Oh
Yeah.
my God, there's still 30 minutes.
Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
15 minutes too. It was like there's still 15 minutes. The last 15 minutes of it was like, yes, it's good that that
Well,
is in here, but
no, I think it's like the penultimate 15 minutes is like the stuff where you're like, whoa, we're really going somewhere. And then it goes into this final 15-minute kind of like postlude that's just like, oh my God, this is
Yeah.
going so slow.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But
It's long and it's a lot.
yeah, but like watching it for the first and second time, like I was so enraptured in it that like it does its job of that weird pacing. I think it's kind of meant to be a little unsettling, but then this third time I'm just like, oh my goodness. And because I was also doing it for the podcast, I was like
Right,
in
right,
a
right.
different frame of mind too. So
Yeah. That's interesting. I wonder if like yeah, maybe the second time is like the ideal viewing of it because you
yeah,
know where it's headed, but by the
Point.
third you're like, okay, I
yeah,
don't know. I love a long movie. I totally get the complaint about it, but I love kind of being like in for a long haul with like a weird movie that takes big swings. So like,
yeah.
yeah, this time around I was just like really vibing with it, but I
I love
understand
it.
that I was very curious to hear what you all thought because, it was a very polarizing movie when it came out.
Yeah. I mean, I still love it. And like I do love a good movie myself. I just bought a few months ago the 4K director's cut of Midsummer. I've probably watched it like six
Mm,
times
yeah.
in that period. And that's a pretty long movie too.
Yeah. They
So
added a lot for that director's cut, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
So
well also in the movie I like I forget where it was, but it was well over an hour and a half in, and probably around the 2-hour mark, I would guess. But I texted Pace and I was like, "Oh, I think I finally have like figured out what is happening in the movie."
Yeah.
So
That's better
yeah,
than me
then
because
you
I
go
didn't know
back
it
to
was
the beginning
happening.
and you're like,
Well,
Yeah.
that's also something I want to talk about. My third experience watching it too is I feel like I was able to track what was happening less than I did the
Mm,
last time. And
interesting.
that also is probably because of just like being overwhelmed from dissertation and the
Hmm.
world burning around us. But beyond that,
Right.
like it is, I will say it is weird to watch this movie in the current political climate
Hmm.
that was different than the previous time I watched it,
Hmm.
which I
I
think the second time I watched is probably during the pandemic, so it's still like during the Trump presidency, but the first round. So I don't
I
know.
was confused in part of it because I was like, well, it was like doing subtitles, and I really appreciate subtitles, but when I have to use them to understand, it's
Hmm.
a little bit harder because I am neurodivergent in a particular way and multilingual in a particular way that's just not usually my experience.
Hmm.
And so then I would miss some stuff because it was like the news in German, and then I'd like catch something about hostages, and I'd catch something about like, and I was like, why are, I don't even know if
Yeah,
anybody wants to like help
no, that's a
elucidate
great.
that.
See, we're on our transitions roll today because that's a great transition to some background
I thought it
about
might
this
be.
film. You're so amazing, Emily. So, yeah, yes,
Yes.
please.
Because I took almost 20 years of dance way back when I was a youngin.
Oh,
I think
yes.
from the time I was 5 till the time I was almost, well, I mean, like on and off. So I guess it wasn't 20. It's more like 18 and on and off in college. So when I was a little girl, my mother was like, you're just such a tomboy. You need more grace, and that's how I ended up in ballet.
Wow.
It was more like I didn't need grace. I needed gay. And then, but I ended up liking it, and it made me strong, and it was really. But when I moved back to Maryland in second grade, is when I first saw Stars and Stripes. And the ballet school that I went to had people of all ages, and they from like very very small to very very adult, older women, middle-aged women. Like she just taught everybody. Her name was Medora Lynn, if you ever heard a name that was more
Oh, that's
appropriate
a
for a
name.
ballet teacher.
That's cool.
And the school is called the Ballet Slipper, and the oldest girls, the most advanced class, um, did the same dance every other year. So every other year they had the recitals, and the year that it fell on I actually like missed half of my high school prom because the recital was more important to me.
Hmm.
Because ever since I was little, I saw Stars and Stripes, and Stars and Stripes was the only dance that was the same every recital. Okay, and Stars and Stripes was for the oldest class who had the most experience, and it was basically the Rockettes on point. And it doesn't look that difficult, and it probably isn't if it's not on point. But doing all of that kicking and holding on to each other and jumping on point is not fun. Okay, like what it does to your toe, because you're on your toes the entire
Yeah.
dance. But ever since I was little, I wanted to be in Stars and Stripes. You had to be picked to be in that dance. And I finally made it like my senior year. So fuck that prom. I was going to Stars. I was going to be in Stars and Stripes. And the coolest part was it was a I guess like the mark that you get that says something about your talent is that if you can make Stars and Stripes, you can dye your shoes red, your toe points red. You had to have pink ones for all the other ones. She was really strict about this. There had to be pink tights and black leotards and like, so you didn't get to do anything fun, but these were red toe points, okay? So like that whole like the red shoes thing in a chorus line, it was for real for me my whole life. I still have those fucking points, and they are my pride and joy. And and let me tell you, like I had to practice, and I had like practice on my own, and I also had to do class 3 times a week, and class was 2 hours, and then like 2 months before the recital, class was like 5 hours. It was ridiculous. My feet were bleeding at the end of every class. My toes have never been the same. Like 2 years ago, my pinky toe was finally able to like move on its own again.
Wow.
Like finally. And like there was cuts all up my ankles. So when I watched this, well, at first I was like, I don't know about this. But then I was like, oh, Tilda Swinton. And then I was like, who is that person? Who is that person? There's, oh my God, that Dakota Johnson? And then I was like, this is all about ballet. Okay. So now I'm watching the whole thing, and like as a like former ballerina, I can say for reals, that's a freaking coven, and it feels like it too. It makes sense to me. Like there's all of these people doing these actions as a group, and in that group it creates a certain amount of energy. It has to be done on a certain schedule. You have to all meet at the same time to do this ritual, and it's a ritual that has particular dances, that has particular movements. It has placement. You know where the east is, you know where the west is, you know where forward and back is, and there's very specific things about that. And then a person who's the most advanced in that particular group of people, they get to do special things and preside over and you get a token that like, I mean, my red shoes were like priestess robes for me. You know, there's a sacrifice of blood. There's a sacrifice of time. There's a group think that happens when everybody's doing it at the same time. Like, yeah, that's a ritual. That's a coven. I was in a coven, like 100%. And not in a good, fluffy, kind, sweet way. Like in a not in a good way. Okay? Like in a very bad magic kind of way.
Right.
We sacrificed our young bodies and any hopes of ever not having calluses on our feet or ever having a pretty toe. I mean, I have the ugliest toes on the planet. Like, they are hideous. The calluses, I'll cut them off at night and they magically grow back the next day. Like, I can step on a tack and I won't bleed. Like, that's...
There's so much body horror in dance. In real life.
So much. So much. And I
this
mean,
movie gets into a little bit, but there's like Black Swan that really goes into it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, no, that's true too. The body horror about you is also like being in some witch lore. Like, these are not real witches, but like rich lore, where like you have to wait until you're at a particular talent level or you're at a particular age before you're allowed to engage in certain rituals. You know, like, I can't, like, you're not allowed to touch toe points until your feet are formed to a certain amount, you know? So, yeah. Oh, yes. And I agree, we're doing bloody shoes. I was just picking out the bloody shoes. We're picking bloody shoes today when we rate. Because my red toe points, this is the one time I'm going to throw my toe points around and be like, no, we have to rate in bloody toe points for once.
Yes.
Okay, rant over.
Or dyed
I'll
red,
go back to tech.
But
those were my feelings about it.
I love it. That's great.
Yeah, that's a fascinating perspective on this movie.
Yeah, there's a lot. And the bloody ritual we get in this, too. I cannot wait. So, let's get into some background, though. And I love when our guest comes prepared. You have a lot of stuff. Why don't you share away? This is awesome.
Sure. Probably too much stuff. So, trying to pare down. But yeah, the original, we kind of touched on this, was set in contemporary Berlin when it came out in 1977. And this actually uses 1977 Berlin to grapple with kind of the themes, which we'll talk about as we go on. But this generational post-war German autumn season, they called it, where kind of the descendants of the previous generation, who were Nazis, were coming of age and trying to figure out what that meant kind of politically. So I find it a really fascinating background for this movie. I know other people were kind of like, how do these things align and are they like reaching a little bit? It came together for me personally on this viewing, but I know that was what Luca Guadagnino kind of was interested in doing by revisiting it, was kind of finding a new way to tell it. So um, some of the things that I thought were interesting, I mean, so Tilda Swinton plays three characters in it,
Right.
which was not something that was disclosed during the release of the movie. Like people had to be like, that really looks like Tilda Swinton. They were like, nope, nope, he's a German man we found. He's never acted
Yep.
before. So that's really interesting that she plays these three distinct
They only
characters.
credit
Yeah.
her on IMDb. They only credit her with two, and
Okay.
they only
And
credit Dakota with one,
Okay. Yeah.
which is interesting.
Because,
But that's what Pace also told us, that
hmm,
as we were watching, that Tilda Swinton plays three and Dakota
yeah.
Johnson plays two. So
And then the woman who plays Susie's mom also plays Death,
yeah.
which is like really interesting that that's the two characters that
mhm.
person plays. So there's something going on with all of that. I don't know if I'm articulate enough to wrap my head around all of it, but that was part of the vision from the beginning. Was kind of this like multiple characters thing. Um,
Yeah.
and then I don't know. I'm sure Pace, you have stuff to say about this too. But the idea was that this was a remake of Dario Argento's original, but also kind of his trilogy of the Three Mothers more generally, which there's Suspiria and then a sequel, Inferno, and then years later, Mother of Tears. And they're kind of like loosely connected to each other. But Mother Suspiriorum is the mother of sighs, which is Suspiria. Mother Tenenbaum is the mother of darkness, which is Inferno, and then Mother Lacrimarum is the mother of tears, which is the movie Mother of
Yeah.
Tears. So he wanted to grapple with like that whole trilogy within the movie.
Mhm.
And I know that they planned a sequel, which the idea was it was going to be a prequel about Helena Marcos before, but it was canceled due to lack of box office and really polarized critical reaction. So I don't know. That's kind of what I had as the background.
Yeah. I love it. I
I think
there's yeah, go ahead.
I think the setting in like 1970s Germany makes sense with what you were saying, John. I just don't know the like hostage terrorist
Yeah, that really
situation.
happened.
Like I don't know what that actually,
I'll
because
I can
obviously that was not in
speak to
the
that a little bit.
original because that was when it was released. But
Right.
Pace,
Yeah.
Lucy.
There's so the German Autumn is a period in German history that where, as John was saying, like people are coming of age who are the children of Nazi Germans, and then there's also this kind of far left that kind of divulged into two, kind of like we're seeing some of this polarization now, where it's like we have this generational trauma coming out in ways that people kind of veer far left or far right, and it starts to break into violence, and so there's terrorist attacks by kind of far left groups trying to make demands and distance from far right groups who were doing active harm with it, and then a kind of centrist government trying to hold it all together. And so it just kind of was like this explosion of like violence and stuff. And so the hostage crisis on the Lufthansa was a real thing that happened that resulted in kind of the collapse of the um one of the groups. And shortly after that, it was followed by a mass death by suicide in jail. Allegedly, there's some people talk about that with all sorts of conspiracy theories, but
Mm-hmm.
so it's kind of this movie is kind of set against the collapse of this far left movement, um, and this kind of weird acknowledgement of conservatism,
Mm-hmm.
biocentrism. So that's kind of like the backdrop of what's happening in this movie, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is very interesting and really adds to the texture of the movie and the film.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Agreed. Agreed.
anything you'd add to that, John?
Um, I don't think so. I mean, I'm really fascinated to sort of get into it more as we get into the themes, but
Yeah.
there was a lot there that I didn't really put together, like I was saying earlier, until the second time I saw it, that I was like, oh, the themes of the context of the sort of political moment that you're talking about, that this is set against. I didn't really understand how those two stories sort of synthesize, and I think I understood it more this time. So,
Yeah.
yeah, as we get into it, I think it's more important than I maybe initially gave it credit for.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
That makes sense.
Um, and then I have just a little bit about the road to this film being made is Dario Argento, the director and kind of creator of the original trilogy, which by the way, we almost covered as our franchise for this season. So we're going to do Suspiria. That was like always the plan, but to also do Mother of Tears and Inferno, but we ended up going a little bit of a different route. But one of these days we're going to have to cover both of those on the
Yeah.
podcast too. But so Dario Argento was initially kind of opposed to any sort of remake. It was a very personal trilogy to him, and he just kind of didn't see the point of it. But uh, the director of this film, Luca, and then David Gordon Green were kind of working on a concept together, and Luca was able to get Dario Argento's approval for kind of like go ahead once he kind of said this is the concept we're aiming for. Uh,
Mhm.
David Gordon Green is the director of Halloween, the trilogy. That's the first one came out in the same year as this.
Mhm.
So he ended up dropping out for like those kind of projects. And so Luca took it on himself and kind of reworked it a little bit further. He is probably most known for Call Me by Your Name and then also the A24 film that came out this year, Queer. And so he's a queer man himself. And so I can definitely see there's like a queer through line of this film too that I want to
Mhm.
unpack later on. It's he describes the film as his most personal film, and he also said it was written intentionally as an opera.
Mm.
Uh, and then there's a major influence to Pina Bausch, who was a ballet
Mhm.
teacher and ballet performer herself that kind of did this postmodern impressionist style. And so the character of Madame Blanc was directly like based on Pina Bausch.
Mhm.
And then the last thing I just comment on is we've been alluding to this all along, but what exactly is its relation to the original is kind of marketed initially as like a remake. It's not really a remake. Some
Mhm.
people call it like a companion piece or kind of a meditation on the original or something. I I don't know. I feel like it's kind of like if you take a game board like whatever Monopoly or something, and you have those pieces that makes the original, and then you have the same game board and pieces but you create a new game, is
Mhm.
what
Mhm.
this one is. That's like
Yeah.
the closest I can describe to like what I think is happening here.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say is we need to take Monopoly and make it all about socialism.
I mean,
I like it.
probably not wrong there.
That sounds good.
Just checking.
Yeah, there's I don't know. I think the fact that it is so ambitious in its like what it's trying to tackle was both what got some people into it who liked it and turned some people off, where it was like the original movie is like vibes. Like it's like colors and synthy music. You don't
This
really
one is
even
also vibes,
it is
just to be
vibes.
perfectly clear.
This is kind of
Major
like
vibes.
bad vibes in this one, and the
Yeah,
original's kind of like
right,
neon vibes.
Mm-hmm.
for
Um,
sure.
and I love to just kind of vibe out to the original, but this
Yeah,
dives so much more like satisfactorily into like the witch stuff isn't even really revealed until the end of the original. Um, and there's none of the kind of ending of this one in terms of
yeah,
the three mothers and all that stuff. So I found this one really rich in terms of like kind of rearranging the themes, like you were saying, and the characters and the beats are all there, but it's like a totally different iteration
yeah.
of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a
And
remix.
I like that the witches are more present in the beginning because that was part of it for
Hmm.
the first one that I was like, I mean, both of them, right? I was like, I don't know what's going on. But
Yeah.
the first one, I really, really had no idea what was going on most of the time because it was
Yeah.
all vibes and color, and that was it. And so this one, I was like, okay, I get like some semblance of the plot and the vibes. And it let us, and Susanna named it, I think we all were naming it while we were watching, but it let us really look at the dance
Mm-hmm.
through the lens of spell and magic and
Mm-hmm.
witchcraft, and that the dance itself was the spell, whereas so frequently it is the words, or maybe like the swish and flick, shall we say,
Mm-hmm.
of like a wand moving, but instead it was the entire body moving
Mm.
Yeah.
to make it happen.
I
There's
love
a
that.
Yeah, there's a deep embodiment to this movie that I can't wait to talk about in our deep
Mm.
dive.
Mm-hmm.
Before I get into that though, do we have our segment that started initially as a joke, but has now become like a full-on thing where we come up with a one-sentence summary to describe the film. What what is your one-sentence summary of the 2018 film Suspiria?
Uh, I could start because I'm seeing the other ones and they're better than mine. But I had ancient mythic witch returns in the form of young Mennonite from Ohio, proceeds to fuck shit up.
Love it. No, don't
Love it,
belittle
love it,
yours.
love it.
Don't. It's
That was
great,
fantastic. That was
right?
fantastic.
All right, thanks.
And it's totally true. That
Yeah.
is this movie.
It was like my levels when we first started doing this
Yeah.
segment. Perfection. Pace.
Okay, I guess I'll go next. Mine is colorful vibes remade slash revised slash resomethinged into gray slash gay vibes.
Love it.
Nice. Mine is
I haven't really thought about it, but if I had to pull something
Yeah,
off the cuff, it would be yet another director's tale of how they are turned on and terrified of the archetype of the the triple goddess.
Mm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
There's this weird cis gay fascination with, although the director refers to himself as queer, but also within cis gay culture. And I think Call Me by Your Name, which is another film he directed, has this a lot of this like really weird relationship with
yeah. I
fantasy and violence and
Oh wait,
Mm.
no, wait. Tell me out here. So tell me about the director. Is that tell me about the director? The
he's
director identifies
queer.
as queer.
Yeah, and he's like, and I think he's really, really insightful. And that's one of the things we can argue as we go throughout this film is like, I think a lot of the stuff he's doing here is intentional in cool ways and queering ways. And also some of his other films, like Call Me by Your Name,
I
go
never
more
saw
into
it because
that.
I heard about it and
Yeah,
was like,
it's not
I
like
heard it was not
it's
good.
not necessarily a bad movie. The source is bad. It was written by a cis straight author and has this weird kind of like we talked about this in the Alien movie, going all the way back to this when we covered Alien
Mm-hmm.
Prometheus. There's this weird cis gay obsession with like meeting God, and when that's like translated into a sexual story be written by a cis straight man about a older man predatorizing on a younger underage man, and then this kind of fascination with Call Me by Your Name, like this whole like obsession with self.
Mm.
A is kind of gross in like the way that that narrative is assumed onto queer people by straight people.
Mm.
And then also when it's remade into a movie that is still intentional, but like it just doesn't quite fully confront some of that stuff in there. So Call Me by Your Name, I just think is it's a weird movie. It's hard to talk about.
Mm.
You know, one of the things that I'm thinking about right now is through my education via PACE. Different kinds of horror, and then the directors about them. I'm learning some correlations that I've seen in different queer communities, and the first being is that cishet women do not want to talk about the blood.
Mm.
But there are some directors that will engage in talking about the blood and actually see the like for me as like a queer Christian, seeing like the important, like the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross is not unlike the sacrifice Mary made at his birth. Like it is a bloody freaking mess to bring life into the world filled with pain and suffering, right? Like same thing, labor, dying on a cross. I mean,
6 of one, half dozen of the other.
Right? Like so, like there are women, there are cis women that are willing to engage in it, and but like cis het men completely ignore the blood situation, and they like when they talk about women, they just like talk about vulvas. They just put vulvas everywhere. They just slap a vulva on it. But the cis gay men will talk about the blood. They're terrified of the blood. Terrified of the blood. And
or fascinated, or the weird mix of both.
It's the weird mix of both that I'm talking about. There's a fascination, but not without the terror. And so like that makes sense, that hits for me.
I would say it's more than just this game. Like we talked about this with The Exorcist too. And so I'm just gonna let our listeners / viewers cue in here. This movie has so much vibes that I think we're just gonna kind of vibe through this instead of trying to talk about a fairly nonlinear movie linearly.
Okay,
so we're already like
can I
talking
just
about deep
say,
dive stuff.
Dance
Yeah.
is magic and death.
Oh yes,
I love that. I was like, Emily needs to share theirs. It's so good.
Yeah, thank you.
Also, the shortest one. Thank you very much.
Susanna.
Thank you.
Well done.
Susanna and I totally vibing and ADHDing off into outer space where Emily's like, I'm waiting.
Yes,
vibes.
the flavor of neurodivergent.
It's vibes. It's all vibes.
Yes. Anyway, continue vibing.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, in the way that The Exorcist talks about blood around puberty kind of coming of age, whereas this one has more of like a, not to say puberty isn't this in the way depicted in Exorcist. This one feels like it's more of like a meditation on violence and community and salvation all kind of combined, as opposed to being like particularly attached to like, but there is birth there. There is like this very intentional sense of motherhood coming into birth and that being salvific. So kind of like what you're saying about Mary, Susanna. So yeah, I think it's kind of all of those things.
Yeah, I love that. I am curious about, I mean, we get to a scene with a lot of blood in it, and a lot of ritual, and a tearing open of a chest with the heart that kind of is related to the things that you're talking about. So there's plenty to dive in when we get to all that.
Yeah, for sure. What about like the cinematic vibes of this movie? It just like the first one, it has a very distinct cinematic and also aural style, visual, audio style.
There's snow.
Yep. There is snow.
That's the most important thing. Particularly given our last episode, which was on My Bloody Valentine, which was supposedly set in Canada
during winter.
Something? Yeah.
No snow.
No snow. There were leaves on the ground. It was filmed on it looked like it was filmed like on a late spring day. And then I think some reshoots were done in like autumn. And so it's like so apparent this movie was not set in winter.
Yeah. So that's why the snow saved this movie from utter
chaos. Yes.
There's actual consistency in the seasons. Well done.
It feels very autumnal, and then there's that moment where it kind of moves into winter. That snow falling in the window, silhouetted against the characters. For me, sort of like cinematically, the sound design is the thing that I think of first. There's this like breathing, snoring, wheezing thing happening that is in the... Yeah. It's in sighing, is in the original as well. Suspiria, meaning sighing. So that kind of like is pulsating in the background throughout. But the way that it's like, sometimes it's Susie's mother sort of wheezing in like her deathbed, and sometimes it's Susie sleeping, or sometimes it's her breathing while she's dancing. Sometimes it's apparently,
Yeah.
Helena and Marcos under the floor is breathing. So I think of that, and then the sound of the dance movements as they're like hitting the floor and as they're breathing and making the gestures, and then just like
I love
screams
that
and
soundtrack.
chanting. I love all that.
Yeah, I think I really appreciated um, the way they portrayed the dancing stuff because
Hmm.
I went to a school whose dance program was very much like contemporary, progressive kind of dance and not classic dance or classic ballet. And so, like, that's. And the original Suspiria felt more like classic ballet to me.
Right.
And so I was anticipating classic ballet. And then when she does her like audition dance, I was like, oh, this is not.
Mm.
And but it's so visceral
Hmm.
that you can't help but feel it.
Hmm.
Um, and in a certain extent, it reminded me also of like drum circles that I've been to
Mm.
at like, I've been to a few powwows in different places that I've lived, and um, the drum circles and the beat of the drum that just gets like is the heartbeat of it. And so then the pounding and the hands and the movement becomes the heartbeat and the movement of everybody
Mm.
in the dance. It was, yeah,
Yeah.
agreed.
Yeah, there's very little dance in the original, and so to actually use the setting of a dance company and really like take advantage of it here is really powerful. Yeah, I loved what you're saying earlier about the spells are the movements themselves and how they do that together and with each other. It's such a cool. I mean, the dance, the dances themselves and the choreography are so like visceral, and it's such a rich way to tell this story. Um, the camera movement and the editing in general, he's doing a lot of like 70s style zooms and like whip pans and dissolves and these things that aren't really in vogue anymore, and so it's like noticeable. It's shot on film, so it feels kind of like richer than a lot of stuff we see today. So I feel like they're making a lot of choices to be like, we're intentionally moving the camera now in a way that you're gonna uh, have to notice, which also lends itself to like this hypnotically directed feeling, like we're under a spell. Which, Emily, you were talking about the original being like, what is even happening? And I think there's like a dream state in the original movie that's just kind of like, it's all dream logic. Why is there barbed wire in this room? Like,
Literally, the episode, like literally the season that we watched Suspiria in was our Nightmare on Elm Street season, which ended up having
perfect.
all of this dream. Like, even
Mm,
our non Nightmare on Elm Street movies were like dream movies. And
yeah.
yeah, it is.
Totally. And this feels like distinct from that, at least to me, where it's like it's not so much a dream, but it's like this weird haze of a spell you're kind of under.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
And the original, one of the things I love is this constant question of the sound being diegetic or non-diegetic to the film. And this is same thing is happening in this one, like those breathings and stuff. Like how much are the characters hearing that versus how much is it part of the soundtrack and texture of the
Hmm.
film? Like it really kind of calls into question that binary between what are the characters hearing and what are we hearing and what is the difference between that?
Hmm.
One of the
Yeah.
things that I really like noticed, like the reason that I noticed, I was like, oh yeah, this is like various kinds of witch lore where it's like a group, like that there's more people in it. The more people that are involved in a given ritual, the more powerful it is, right? That's why
Mm.
you have a coven, right? So like it one of the things that I noticed is that usually when people are filming a dance sequence, they're zoning in on, they show group shots, but they eventually show faces of individuals throughout the whole thing. Like you'll notice in when you're watching a dance and in a film as opposed to in real life. And this one was very intentionally filming the whole group. Lots of different shots about
Mm.
seeing the whole group, to feel the energy of the whole group, to feel the vibe of the whole group. And it was like, it stuck out to me as somebody who's like watched dances before, and I was like, I don't want to see her face. I want to see what her feet are doing. Because I
Mhm.
couldn't. You can't.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever zooming out wide enough to see everybody, right? So, yeah, they definitely were trying to get that vibe with the cinematography and the angles they were doing.
That's Pace, I think, said
Yeah, I
in
believe
his
the 4K release of this, the actual physical release, has in its extras like uncut shots of some of the dance
Mm.
choreographies and stuff, so you can kind of watch that, because that itself is like the art of dance
Mm.
is really showcased in this movie in a way that was more of an afterthought of the original.
Yeah. Cool.
and it
I'll have to
does
check
feel
that out.
trance-like. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, the using the like intensity of the dance. I don't know. I'm curious about what you all think about how the dance like represents. I don't know. I'm hesitant to get too far into this
Yeah,
because it's like witch lore stuff. Um, but part of my question is like,
yeah,
does the overlying question hanging over a lot of this for me is like, is this feminist? Is this empowering, or is
yeah,
it
yeah,
not?
Right?
Um, and you know, he's bringing a queer perspective, but it's also like written and directed by a man,
yep,
and
yep,
the choreographer was a man. And I'm not. I love the movie, but I'm like, is there a fundamental like we can't get past a story about empowered women, whether it's a coven or a dance company or both?
yeah,
Does it have to be like female power is evil, and I know that
yeah,
like that's what a witch story often is, this kind of witch story, but like as much as I appreciate using the power and the beauty of dance to express that, I do still keep going back to like, and I'm sure this
yeah,
is intentional too, like, are we supposed to feel that they are empowered, or is it like another version of like when these females get together in a big group and they're powerful, of course they're going to be using it for evil means. I don't know. It's something that you wrestle with throughout the whole thing, I
yeah,
feel like.
Yeah. I put that down in my somewhere. I also yeah, the connection between women's empowerment and witches, but is it empowering or controlling or manipulating?
yeah.
Right.
And
And the way
like,
that dance is a manipulation of the body, and typically done in by men, male
Mm-hmm.
choreographers and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. And some of the things like On Point and stuff
Mm-hmm.
were created by men in ways that are oftentimes disabling of bodies.
I
physically,
mean, I kind
yeah.
of feel like the plot change went in the direction of being more. Because, like, you were like, oh, this is a remake. And I
Yeah,
was like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and read about the plot of the first one. Read it. The plot of this one is that, like, surprise, she's always been
Mm-hmm.
the powerful mother. Where, as opposed to, I think the plot of the other one's different. Can y'all tell me?
hmm,
Like, I'm
Yes.
wondering
yeah,
if
I can't tell
the
you the
plot
plot of the other
changed.
one, but it was different.
But I got the impression that the
yeah,
plot of the other one was less so, and the plot of this one, the changes were more in a feminist direction. And
yeah,
I liked it.
for
Like, I
sure.
liked the change. And, like, to me, it was like, okay, we underestimated this person. We thought they were a tool, but they are
Like
actually an all
any
powerful person.
anytime a male artist such as Dario Argento, who calls the female woman subject of his film his muse, like what Quentin Tarantino does with Uma Thurman too in The Kill, like it's just it's icky, and I feel like
That's
that
red
was kind of
bucket.
going on in the first one. But it was still like, but it also was not like, did not have mm, the purpose of the first one was very different. And because of that, it just kind of like uses some gross sexist tropes and without any commentary to make its like fever dream thing. This one, I think there is intentionality going into it, but yeah, it still is that tension of how much is liberating versus how much is continuing narratives, harmful narratives.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
like, trying to do, I'd rather have cis men trying to do empowering stuff. And we talked about it some in Nightmare on Elm Street too, right? Like trying to do
Mhm.
better than to just be like, nope, I can't, so I'm just never gonna have women as protagonists, and I'm never gonna right. So it, like, an improvement, and also yeah, just the particularly, I think the part that for me is the biggest pushback against a feminist understanding of it and against empowerment is the controlling nature of the coven with the dancers. Particularly because the dancers are the ones who are doing the spells, and the coven joins them for a lot of it, but if the dancers are the ones that are actually doing the spells, then it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense, but like the control that the coven has to use them as tools just falls into the trope of witches as evil and stealing innocent children and all of that stuff, versus the empowerment part, which is the part more where Susanna's coming in, right? Of like this character who was the most powerful all along and was Mother Suspirium all along, and was completely missed and overlooked by everybody else because she was young and untrained and new.
I mean,
but
like,
I don't. Go ahead, Susanna. I was just gonna say I don't think that's necessarily the narrative there, but I think it definitely could be read that way. I do think there's this kind of, with the setting of this being this is what I think relates to the context of the film within its context of the German autumn, of being both the coven and then the political sphere are wrestling with a younger generation having to violently overthrow the status quo that is a more controlling status quo. And I think that's a very intentional pairing of those two themes of the film that I think impacts the empowerment story in a way that's a lot bigger than just the chosen one kind of unfolding and realizing she has some special power. And because she's also not overlooked in the beginning, like right off the bat, she starts to set herself apart as the best dancer in the group, or if not the best, at least the one that Madame Blanc is fixated on. And so it's like, it to me is like less chosen one storyline or overcoming adversity as much as it is using first learning the tools of the master and then choosing to throw them aside for your kind of violent uprising, which is also what is happening in the political sphere outside of the movie. That's the backdrop of the film.
Yeah,
that makes sense. I wasn't thinking of it as so much as overcoming or like chosen one, but as a generational overlook kind of thing. But I also like what you're saying, Pace, of the connection, which finally makes the terrorism and hostage and far left stuff make more sense. Like, it gives it some connection piece for me that was otherwise completely missing in my first watch. Yeah.
And like, that's also open to. Oh, go ahead, Suzanne.
I'm really feeling. I'm feeling what you just said a lot, and because on one hand, I'm feeling what you're saying about a younger generation coming forth, and I felt that like deep in my soul. Matt and I were talking last night about, what is the Democrats' problem? Why are they like this? And I was like, as somebody who was like teens and 20s in 90s and 2000s, I can tell you that like these people saw a whole lot of progress in the 70s. They watched it all ripped away from them in the 80s and the early 90s, and then by the time a new generation came around, they were like so possessive of their movement because it was getting ripped apart piecemeal that they never allowed any young people to come up. So like when I worked at the National Organization for Women, like in the early 2000s, and for NARAL, like I can very explicitly tell you that, like, because I'm not in those circles anymore, they're terrible with their young people. Like, they're legit, they were just terrible. They were like very much, I remember sitting under, like, under a booth with Rebecca Walker, Alice Walker's daughter, and us like ranting about it, about how awful they were about young people, that they were very much like, oh, get me a coffee for the movement, honey, you know, or you don't really count. And I'm not even kidding, until you've marched until your feet bleed. Like, when my feet bled on the March for Women's Lives in 2004, when they bled on the Capitol, I was so relieved, because I felt like I got my, like, badge of honor, that I had done enough, because my feet
Got your
bled.
red shoes.
Yeah, we're
I
back
got
to the
my
bloody
red
shoes theme.
again,
Yeah.
right? I got my red shoes again. Well, this time it was red and leather boots, but like, I got my red shoes again. And there really is an eating of the young, because of this, like, okay, well, this power has been taken from me, so I'm so possessive of the power that I don't have any mentorship going on. So, like, that felt really visceral for me when you were talking about it. Like, I felt it in my bones. And then on the other hand, like, yeah, what is the question about what when witches are shown? How are they shown? They're shown in this very, like, power hungry kind of way, which it's my understanding that, like, real witches are not like that. And there, it's like, power is more amongst everybody. So, like, there is, I could see that one too, which, because that is a common trope. When men talk about the power of women, they get power wrong. One, because they don't really know how to, they don't really have a lot of, like, examples of powerful women communities, matriarchal kind of communities. And two, because, as you could see, like, with most people that you come up against in life, they expect the worst. It's proportional to what they would do, right? If they had that power. So I see a lot of times women, or supernatural women of power in any kind of sense, when it's directed by men, is often very much like, well, if I had power, this is what I would do. I would be sexy, and I would totally use it to dominate other people, and when anybody comes through, you know what I mean? Like, but then, so, like, again, I'm in that camp that I'm in, always in, every time I watch a Pace movie, of like, is this a theme, or is this another case of, like, accidentally showing what your biases and whatevers are, right?
And I like to
False
say,
binary.
in response to that, false binary. It
False
is all of it.
binary!
It's all of it.
Yes.
I mean, there's always that unintentional deconstructive act in any kind of art that happens, of like, the art is ultimately going to critique itself in a way that, like, starts to unspill, like, whatever intention is there is starts to unravel as soon as you, and that doesn't matter, like, how progressive the work is versus not. It's just the nature of art. um and so, like, speaking of art, Tilda Swinton can rock old man drag
Oh
in a
my
way I did
gosh,
not know
so
was
good.
possible until this movie.
Yeah, that was so good.
I
I'm
Yeah,
wonder if I would have known, like, if I would have figured it out if I hadn't known that she was playing him. Because I'm like, there's
I would
something,
not have known.
her voice is in there somewhere, sort of.
Hmm.
So you're kind of like, I don't know. I think it works because it sort of contributes to, like,
yeah,
this person being sort of like other than the rest of the cast. It's the only real, like, significant male character in the movie, and it's played by a woman. So there's, like, something
yeah.
interesting there.
I do love that.
Hmm.
um, and yeah, I think there's something to, like, well, we can get into the significance of that character and why that character might be a man. The only, like, man who has it. There's the cops who are men or whatever.
Yeah,
But
Which, like, ACAB, but also sexual assault is bad.
yeah,
Cops were, like, maybe actually trying to do a good thing. Like,
yeah,
that, this is one of the few times that horror is not just automatically ACAB.
it usually is. You're right.
Yeah, but it usually
that's
is. But I do want to talk about the psychologist a lot.
yeah. I was gonna say, with the that scene where, so Susie and Sarah kind of, like, going into the files and trying to figure out what's going on, and Susie sees the witch is like messing with the cops, putting them into this dream state, and
Mhm.
like she doesn't do anything. She sort of like smirks, and that's your kind of first glimpse into like that's not like a typical reaction necessarily to
Yeah,
what's happening. So is there something more to what she's doing? Um, but yeah, I don't know.
yeah,
I agree. Tilda Swinton rocks the rock. She rocks anything, but
right.
the old man drag for sure. Yeah,
It was upon watching it for the first time, it was one of those performances I was like, there's something up about this. And so, since the movie had been out for a few months by then, I looked it up immediately as I was watching it. I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. So I didn't get like the full like clocking it, but I definitely was like, there's something going on here that makes me
yeah,
curious to look it up. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I've seen criticism of like that character feels a little, extemporaneous or like why does this story about women ultimately sort of center on the man's story? Like it culminates in his experience. I don't know what I think about that. Like I like how it ends, but it is
hmm
interesting that they create this character for this movie and add in the kind, he's the sort of direct connection to the Holocaust, which is like what they're grappling with the aftermath of. And so I think it's powerful that they tie in that element to it.
yeah.
But I hear people saying like, why is this added in? But I don't know. I find
And
Well,
power in
and I
it.
think this, okay, I have a theory.
okay.
I think at least part of it is the question that is raised from his character um in the two different interactions that he has with the witches, right? Where he has the one who like pretends to be his long lost wife and is like saying all this stuff, and then the witches are like, nope, wrong, she's dead, you should have listened to her, you should listen to women, like you're trying to listen to women. So it's this dynamic of like right now he's trying to listen, even though he dismissed Patricia the whole time she was his patient, until she stopped coming, and then he was like, oh, I wonder what's wrong, and then figured out what's wrong. But the accusation that he just dismissed the concerns of women, that he dismissed the concern of his wife who wanted to get out and needed to get out, and
hmm
ultimately died, versus the like he is trying to find out what happened to this woman, and
Yeah.
then is trying to help the other women in relationship to it. And I think the end, when he's like told what it was like when his wife died, when Anka died, um I wonder about that, in that she like gives him peace about like the like knowledge of how she died at Terezin, which was one of the camps not known for, like it was the propaganda camp, right? People died there, but it was the propaganda camp. So there's an extra piece of like, if you know the different Holocaust,
Hmm.
like the different concentration camps, it's an extra dynamic to it.
Yeah.
Um, but and Terezin was right outside of Prague, 45 minutes outside of Prague.
Hmm.
But also, was the accusation that he never believed women part of what she was coming in to correct and to comfort him about? Like,
I
yeah.
we also cannot um it would do harm not to point out that there's some intentionality here around making amends and grappling with guilt and shame over the Holocaust, written and directed by someone who was coming of age in the 70s and experiencing this. It wasn't in Germany, he was in Italy, but Italy was having a lot of the same stuff with grappling with
Mm-hmm.
Mussolini and complicity and things like the Holocaust. And to use this arc as a way of also putting an allegory there about not believing the Jewish people and the ways that witchcraft in European folklore is intentionally anti-Semitic in its depiction, and then to have a coven of witches as this man is being confronted with his own kind of internalized anti-Semitism and complicity and harm, and then him ultimately be a survivor of that um, to continue to wrestle it, but also to try to change himself because of it. I think it's part of the story too that it's easy to miss for many North American audiences without that European context.
Yeah.
Like
But
it
also
is a
then he
big
forgets it all.
cultural thing.
Right? All of
How
the
much
wrestling and all of the growth, then it's like, and you will forget this.
is it all of it, or is it particularly that portion in the coven?
I mean, she
It was
says his wife too. He'll forget.
Well, yeah,
everyone
but
who it was something like like getting rid of the parts that were the guilt and shame parts
yeah, yeah,
and the people that caused him harm.
Yeah, she says
yeah, you're right.
we need guilt and shame, but not yours. Which I think is maybe what some people took issue with is like, why does he sort of,
Get a pass.
yeah, which again, I don't know exactly, but for a movie that's like very much about guilt and bearing witness and atonement,
Yeah. And
like, yeah,
no, that's great.
I was just gonna say he's chosen as the witness to this
Yeah,
atrocity, just as he was witness to like the rise of Nazism and um, having been accused of not doing enough, accused of not believing women.
yeah,
But then that's complicated somewhat by Susie slash Mother Suspiriorum wiping his memory. Like I don't know exactly. I, I guess you can
yeah,
wrestle with what what it means to like have learned something from those experiences and learning about the fate of his wife and then wiping it all away. But then you also get to, I'm really jumping ahead here, sorry. But
No,
like,
no,
we're
we're
jumping around. We're
vibing,
jumping
yeah,
we're
around.
vibing.
the last shot of the movie is his and his wife's initials carved into the side of their house, right? Like years in the future. And so I take that to sort of mean like what endures after the
Yeah,
atrocities. So like memories can't really be erased because there are physical evidence of sort of what's left behind even after this atrocity happens and there's a new generation coming up. So I don't know. It's a
no,
really
that's great.
complex character.
Yeah, and one that I
um,
think that definitely lands differently for different approaches to the movie.
for sure. Yeah. I feel like I skipped over a lot of notes and going to
No,
that point. So,
we're
feel
all
free to go back to whatever
yeah,
was
we're all
next.
vibing, going around.
Yeah.
Um, One thing I was going to say a long time ago when we were talking about the dance portion is that Dakota Johnson and Mia Goth trained for like a year or 2 years or something really long, and everybody else who's like a non-matron member of the company who's a young dancer was an actual professional dancer. So I feel like they're both really great in it, and they're dancing like
Yeah,
you were saying when they kind of show the full body, like they're really doing a lot of those movements, which is powerful to see.
yeah,
So I was really a little bit thrown by like Dakota Johnson's performance the first time I watched it, and she's kind of known to be, she kind of has this like placid reaction a lot of the time. Um,
yeah,
but I think that really works as you're aware of where her story goes. When you're
yeah,
watching it with the knowledge of what's happening, I feel like it takes on a new, like it's not her sort of removal is more the piece of knowing what's happening and letting it unfold, which I thought was really interesting. So anyway, that's
yeah.
maybe neither here nor there, but I wanted to go back
No,
to that
that's
point.
yeah, for sure, for sure. And that also reminds me to bring up Mia Goth herself, which who you
hmm
mentioned as like the first two times I watched this, she wasn't having the moment she's having in the past like 3 or 4 years, especially in
Right.
horror. So like I did not connect that until this rewatch. It's like, oh my God, that's Mia Goth. And then
Yeah.
just, seeing a lot of her, she has very unique performances. And so it's kind of seeing an early iteration of that is kind of cool.
Yeah. She took on a new level of her character was like newly important having had that, new information about her as an actor, I feel like this time I saw it.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I was skipping straight ahead to the sort of deep theological stuff, but
Yeah.
if there
No,
are
No.
previous things we
that's
want
good.
to
That's
do,
good.
that's fine.
Bit of a problem with my stream, and I don't know what it is. Just letting y'all know, it might cut out.
All
I may
good.
have to pop back in. So I wanted to just real quick say, you know, like here's the moment in future pace editing that when if it dies, this is when we do it. So
Yeah, no problem.
could you give me a minute because I might have to
Sure.
reboot the stream.
Bloody orgy.
Bloody. You're funny. Okay, let's see.
This
what
is
this-
recorded, Emily. I can capture that and use it for a new transition segment or something.
I think it picked it back up. Again.
Maybe we're going
think
into
you
our favorite
still
kills.
haven't
That's what
given-
we'll do.
I think you still haven't given Susanna the recording of our transition or our DV.
Oh, I did a while ago, but I had never updated into future iterations of the folder because I forgot about it. So I will do that.
I think, is it true that it kept it? Yeah, so it might be a little
Okay.
swoosh, but it didn't actually end it online. Okay, good. I
Perfect.
think I rebooted it fast enough that.
Yay!
Okay, cool. Thanks. Continue
Well,
gaily
You're
forward.
good. Thank you. So there are two quick things I want to talk about the class self before we just full on go into the rest of our deep dive stuff, which both kind of also relate to deep dive things. But the first one is so there's this quote when Madame Blanc is trying to get her to jump higher and higher and higher. And she says, there are two things that dance can never be again, beautiful and cheerful. Today we need to break the nose of every beautiful thing, which I think relates directly to the theme of the film, because that is a reference to Joseph Goebbels' statement, who was a Nazi propagandist who basically said that dance under Nazi Germany needs to be beautiful and cheerful, and that's it. And so I think that's an intentional, like, driving in some of the themes of this film. And that most people wouldn't make that connection without knowing. And then I just to end the film, it is not even the end of the film, because like I said, this is like 15-minute like post-it after it. But like there's just this really like 15-minute long bloody scene that involves dance, it involves sacrifice, it involves weird people who you didn't realize were even characters, just paintings, and like it's just this whole weird thing that happens in like this weird 15. And then it's also the most like red is a color throughout the film, kind of like in a way it's done in shiny and stuff like that. But the fact that red was a prominent color in the first film, this is like the first film and only film in the scene that really feels like it bears a very intentional, similar color palette to the original. It's like just all pastel red.
Yeah.
You are muted, John.
Sorry.
You're good.
It's such a noticeable shift. Because like you said, we've been in this drab concrete Berlin Wall adjacent vibe. And so that's the scene in which everything kind of turns. Which I think is partly why the first time I saw it, I was just like, I don't even know how to like process this right now. Like I thought I knew what this movie was, and then it went here. And at the time, I wasn't sure that I liked that. And this time watching, I was just like, hell yeah, like
Yeah.
this rules. I love, you guys talked about when you did the original Suspiria, how the blood is like magenta, like it's not a real
Yeah.
blood, and this is a different color blood, but it is just like, yeah, suddenly everything is just like bathed in this red that feels different from the neon blood of the Giallo movies and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was so much more on board for that whole sequence of events this time around, kind of
Same.
knowing where it was going. So
Oh, yeah, it's such a good scene.
I won't tell you the thing because I have to say it at the end, towards the end. But I did, in that massive blood orgy, Tilda Swinton's character, Madame Blanc, is she not actually dead? Right. And maybe that's like, I mean, I know that wasn't going to be the sequel, but it sets itself up for a like she
Yeah,
still exists within the realm of Mother Superior Susie. Right, like
Yeah.
that, because they're like, oh, she's dead, but then she's like still breathing and stuff, and it's like, well, it is magic, so
yeah. I mean, we can get into, I think this is a good transition to talking about this particular thing of like resurrection in this film. And depending on how you read Susie, this could be like a Lazarus kind of thing she's doing. It could be
Mhm.
itself some sort of res uh death and resurrection narrative. Like, but it's also very intentionally still in that like bewitched ambiance that you were talking about, John, earlier, of like we don't even know it's real at this point. So
Right.
Mhm.
is she actually resurrected? Like, did any of this even happen? We don't really
Right.
know.
Right.
You see most of her neck come like clean off, so you think it's
Mhm.
done, and then she kind of looks over at everything at the end, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh. So I don't know. I mean, you could make, Susie slash Mother Superiorum is, so she goes after the people who voted for Marcos, right? Not for Blanc. So in theory, she
Right.
should, still like she could like heal Blanc, I guess, if she has the power to, I assume, but we don't see her do that. And then we never see Blanc again. So it is an interesting question that the last shot of her is her sort of like turning still alive, taking it in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And like the gift that I don't know where I put it, but like the oh, I am that's what happened. I was trying to jump around while we watched, and so I put half of my stuff in the witch lore section. Um, I think the way that this movie portrays Mercy is really interesting
Mhm.
because when Susie becomes Mother Suspirium and she goes and she like everybody gets killed and their heads explode and stuff, but the girls who were used and abused, she goes to each one of them and asks them what they want, and they all say that they want death. And so the mercy is in the death. And it part of me then also wonders like what if they had said life? What if they had said, like Madame LeBlanc might, my head back on my body.
yeah,
I'm gonna keep going, right? Like that those different like that particular moment of mercy, that the mercy that she shows the psychiatrist, that she gives the psychiatrist, is both the information about death, the death of his wife, and the mercy of forgetting, um, which is not something that I normally recommend at all because I think it's really harmful when we
Yeah.
forget stuff. Um, but yeah.
So, yeah, I have thoughts on that, but it's like deep thoughts. And so, like, trying to figure out how to say this without going to Professor Paceman and rambling off my dissertation section on a similar thing. But basically, like, for me, there is this queer, like, I legit, this is part of my dissertation, like, this understanding of this queer desire for illegibility, which is the breakdown of identity, ultimate oneness with the divine. Kind of like this theotic divinization kind of desire to just be unwritten. And we even have this millennial humor of like, just like my New Year's
Not
resolution is an
perceived.
asteroid knock us out or something. And just like this weird fascination with like, especially when you have suffered extreme trauma, especially when you are reckoning with some serious guilt and shame of just being like released in a form of non-existence or into something so much beyond that we become one with it. And this kind of eschatological erasure. And so like I feel like that's kind of also this like knowing that God is one of understanding of life and death and justice beyond us, just wanting that to happen, whatever it may be.
Mm.
And so like so it's just kind of like I feel like that's kind of potentially a through line in the film as well. But
yeah.
it's all vibes.
No, that's fascinating. I feel like it lends itself, I think what both of you are saying sort of lead to the question of like, is Susie slash Mother Superiorum like good? Is she evil? Is she both of those things? Because I
Yeah.
think the first time I saw it, I was like, the true ancient witch has taken her rightful place and is back on top in power. But I think there's a way to read it, maybe similar to the movie The Witch, where like you're cheering for her to kind of like take her rightful place. Like I
Yeah.
wrestle with that same thing with that movie where it's like, hell yeah, she's like flying up in the sky with them at the end. She's empowered, but also like
Hmm.
that group of people like does like snatch and kill babies. Like,
Right.
so should we be cheering? I don't know. That's kind of part of the like ambiguity of it, I guess. But this time
Yeah.
I was like cheering for Mother Superiorum to
Yeah.
kind of take that revenge because if you're going with the kind of reading that we had of the background of German generations changing and the older generation giving way to the young generation, like whether through force or not, um, there's a Marcos is the one who was using all of the women in the coven for her own power and gain. And I'm assuming that that's why she's taking revenge on those who voted for Marcos and
Yes.
on Marcos because she wants to do it in a better way, which would be in keeping with her giving mercy to her friends
Mhm.
who, had already kind of been killed, but had been in this weird liminal state, and giving a version of mercy to the Dr. Klemperer psychiatrist character. So I don't know. I'm curious about what you all. There's a lot to unpack with like,
Yeah.
is Susie evil? Is she actually kind of the hero?
Yeah.
I tend to read
I
it
mean,
as more she's now doing something good with the
yeah.
group, but who knows?
And this is like the theodicy question itself of like Susie as potentially a stand-in for God or some sort of divine figure, whatever that may be interpreted as. Like the very question of is God, is this other good or evil,
Mm,
or is it just so other that our concepts do not even apply,
mhm,
Mm-hmm.
and beyond our understanding? And there's definitely an argument that can be made each way in this movie.
mhm. Yeah. I mean, I wonder if anybody has thoughts on was she like born to be Mother Superiorum, or did she transform into her? Did she kind of like become a vessel for her in the way that like
Yeah.
Marcos was hoping that she would be for her? I don't know, but there's
Which
a lot.
which is particularly poignant given what her mother says about her,
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
right? That she is the sin that she smeared into the world or whatever.
Yeah.
Is her mother prophetic?
Mm,
Is her mother just a regular old, terrible, abusive, misogynistic mother?
Hmm.
Something else? Both?
Yeah.
I don't know. But I think
yeah.
that's part of it that like lends itself to that is there is, and it feels like the movie sets us up for that, right? It feels like there is something about her, not just because her audition is so amazing, but from the start of like she is there at her mother's bedside and her mother is wheezing her last breaths and she's sitting and like it took me a minute to make the connection between her sitting there and her looking at the money that she got from the Mennonite church or whatever.
Mm,
And like that I don't know, there's something about the cinematography in those parts
Hmm.
that just like pulls me into wondering about that.
Yeah.
yeah. I feel like it's intentionally ambiguous whether does she just come from a strict Mennonite background and so therefore she was evil in her mother's eyes because her mother was, there's scenes of her sort of like catching her like masturbating and she keeps drawing like Berlin on all her maps because that's where she
Mm-hmm.
wants to go. And is that because she's from this like strict religious household and she's rebelling, or is it because she really is like this ancient evil or ancient force or something, and her mom knows that? There's a moment where Marcos tells her she has to kill her mother to like accept her new mother. And then we do a
Mhm.
flash to her mom on her deathbed, and there's kind of this shadowy hand going over her face. And I think you could read that like any number of ways, but is Susie like
Mhm.
killing her in that moment? There's so much about mothers and death and one mother becoming
Yeah.
another and all of that here.
Yeah.
And
But yeah, I think that question, Emily, is like very much at the center of kind of her arc.
yeah, and I
Oof,
think
that hit
oh
me in
yeah,
the
go ahead. Yeah.
feels. Well, I just want to
Yeah.
say that hit me in the feels because, like, my mother died recently in
Hmm.
2023. And I, my entire life was very sure that I had basically nothing in common with my mother and that I couldn't be more different. And me and our friend, we have another friend that is often like dealing with this feeling, but like this feeling after my mother died of like, am I going to become my mother, has like escalated in a way that I can't even explain to
Yeah.
you. Like,
Hmm.
I don't know if it started with TikTok and that like age progression thing, the one filter that made you look old, and I like did it and it was my mother looking at me in there, and I was like, holy fuck. Like, and also nobody ever really said that I look like my mother before, but apparently I look like her when I get old, and it was absolutely terrifying, such a mind fuck. And I and also like my health isn't super great, and I'm starting to show right after she died. I'm starting to show some of the genetic stuff that runs in my family, and rather than just be like, oh, I'm getting older and I'm getting some of the genetic crap in my family, I like seriously, deep in my soul on a mystical level, feel most nights before I go to bed that my mother died and handed off the curse of her
Yeah.
genetic nightmare
Hmm.
into my body. It seeped into my body. It like some sort of magical transference. And like that is how the things you feel when your parent dies. I don't know if you still have both your parents, John, but like
I
it,
do, yeah.
yeah, it is. I think I'm the only one here who has lost a parent. So like
Hmm.
it is just, there is a thing that happens at that death that you don't even see coming, and I didn't even know about when I have done all these different things, whether it's podcasts or papers or whatever, about mothers and daughters and the cycles and
Mhm.
intergenerational harm and breaking generational cycles. But holy crap, it felt like I was infested. I have
Hmm.
felt infested ever since she died
Mhm.
with
Hmm.
something that is going to turn me into her.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's horror right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Real life horror
yeah.
right
Yeah.
there.
Between
Yeah,
between that and your dance experience, I feel like this movie is like really
right?
working
It's
on a
coming
deep
for
level.
you.
Yeah, geez.
Yeah, well, that's a day in the life being a friend of Pace's. Like, that's one of the things that I love the most about Pace, is that Pace finds a way to challenge you without you
Oh, that's
feeling
sweet.
like, without it being adversarial,
Hmm.
like academically and
Nope.
faith wise, and like it doesn't feel adversarial. They just challenge you, and if they're about to say something really challenging, they'll be like, I'm being really super gentle right now, by the way, and like it's really sweet. But yeah, this is the day of the life of
Yeah,
being in Pace's circle, is
yeah.
being
My weird
challenged in a good way.
also superpower of recommending very on point movies for people apparently too.
I love it.
And and like this really, I mean, I'm in dissertation brain right now, so of course there's a lot of connections between like there's a legit chapter in my dissertation about body horror because of course there is, it's space. But like
Mm-hmm.
but like there's so many connections that like I could spend a whole class talking about it, so I'm not going to do that. But I do have two things in particular I want to still say, and then of course anything else you all want to say before we move into which lore. But the first is a queer reading of this film. I mean, it was made by a queer person. He said it's very intentionally one of his most personal stories he's told. And I see that in the generational stuff. Like, I definitely can see, like, him having a similar perhaps experience to you, Susanna, of just feeling like this wrestling with that. I could see that definitely being part of the film, but also just this queer kind of coming out experience that Susie experiences when she becomes the witch, the kind of political framework of the cis white gays who tried to say everything's cool, so fuck all the rest of the queers, and then the other parts of the queer movement are like, no, we actually need to get like that's happening in this film too. And then
Mm.
kind of the camp and excess of ballet,
Mm.
and yeah, how also this ballet is also a very specific shift in performance style and dress and choreography than was come before. And there's also this minimalism with the color palette and stuff. So it's just like all these things are wrestling that to me like read very queer in this movie.
Mm.
That makes sense
Yeah.
to me too. Yeah.
And of course, covens are always associated with queerness anyway.
Naturally.
Naturally. Uh, and then the last thing, which is a dissertation thing, but the last thing I'll say about my dissertation is this: my horror chapter about body horror talks about monstrosity versus beauty and how the
Mm.
queer body is proclaimed monstrous. And
Mm.
so, kind of twisting that to finding the monstrosity value that is celebrated or redefining monstrosity. There's this excellent, beautiful article, which I'll link in the show notes because I can't remember off the top of my head, that I quote in there, where a queer person reads Godzilla, the monster, and Mothra's love for each other as this like queer relationship that is interpreted as monstrous in
Huh.
the film and by the people around it. And so like just this kind of reframing of like what is queer is inherently seen as monstrous, but maybe it's not monstrous, or maybe we just need to claim that monstrosity of ourselves and go after the cishets or any kind of reading of that, I think, as well.
Any kind
Yeah.
of reading that includes to go after the cissets, I'm here for it. No offense.
I'd come after us, please. Yeah, no, that's fascinating, Pace. I really appreciate that
Oh, thank you.
insight. There is a like the monstrosity, that's a good word to use because there is a beauty in what's happening in that final kind of Sabbath
Yeah.
section. A like horrible beauty in the first part, and then maybe like a terrible beauty, but like when you are relieved to see in some way in the second part. But
Yeah.
that was something I was struck by this time, was like I didn't really get that's like death personified, like a death demon that Susie kind of calls upon. And in
Hmm.
Inferno, there's a death character that kind of looks similar. So I think that fell more into place for me this time. But
Yeah.
that's a monster. And when it comes out of the depths, the first time I saw it, I was just like scared and overwhelmed. And this time it was more like, this is kind of a beautiful figure bringing relief to
Yeah.
people. And it's played by her mother, the same actress who played her mother. So I'm like, there is a like beauty there. Um, Maybe that's like a redemption of sorts for her to mother. I don't know, but I really respond to that because I think there is a using the monstrous in a reframing of it in that section that I responded to this time.
Yeah.
I do think though, like when we talk about monstrous and body horror, we have to talk about Miss Marcos, Mother
Hmm.
Marcos,
Hmm.
Yeah.
right? Like that her I just had trouble figuring out what the fuck was going on with
Right.
her body.
Totally.
With her body. And I think ultimately I landed on it seems like her body absorbs in different ways, which is consistent with what we like think is about to happen to Susie, but that there's like little baby hands
Yeah.
and
Kind of
body
moving
parts
and
coming
stuff.
off of her body, and I was just like, that is the part that I think was just so disturbing to me that I could not rewatch the whole, like
Yeah.
that sent it over the edge into I cannot possibly like watch this again in less than a week. But just like the way that like they choose to show Mother Marcos, who claims to be Mother Suspiriorum, and yet there is evidence that Madame Blanc says is clear that she is not, because if she were, she wouldn't need
Right.
all of these like innocent child sacrifice ballerinas,
Mhm.
dancers. But she does, and when she like incorporates them or whatever, it does not make her look good. It's
Mhm.
Yeah.
not a good look.
Right.
Um, but also, Pace, I was just wondering if there is a way for people who are finding what you are saying fascinating, if there's any way we could, I don't know, maybe hang out with you for 30 to 60 minutes on a Sunday afternoon and hear more about the different parts of this dissertation?
I don't know what you're talking about. No, yeah, I have a to help me prepare for my defense. I am kind of like discussing each chapter of my dissertation on Sunday afternoons at 3 Central. Y'all can do the math to figure out what that is in your time zone. But it's basically like 30 minutes to a little, maybe a little longer about me talking about a specific chapter of my dissertation, and then time for people to ask questions. And what started as just a way to for me to like practice defense stuff has turned into like people really vibing with it and stuff. So
It was really
there
cool.
are,
I have enjoyed
yeah,
it so far.
yeah, there are 3 more sessions. So if you're interested, it's open to anybody. It's over Zoom. And just reach out to our podcast. You can DM us for the link, or if you are connected with me on socials, do the same.
That's
Or
awesome.
check it out from diaconia.faith because that got
Yeah,
posted.
it's shared on there too.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Um,
that.
Also, Pace, which chapter? So you've talked about two different chapters in this podcast episode.
Hmm.
When are those chapters going to be? Like, which one's this Sunday?
Yeah. So the class is 5 sessions long. I have recordings of the two that have happened already, which was my kind of introductory chapter, and then also talking about my method. So the next 3 chapters are really the heart of the dissertation. So starting this Sunday, which is March 2nd, I think,
Yes.
and the following 2 weeks after that will be kind of the meat of my dissertation. So the next one is where I talk about queer temporalities, and grief is chapter 4 of my dissertation, which is next week. Chapter 5, the week after, is the one on body horror uh, and embodied experience, and kind of linking aspects of that with queer identity. And then the last chapter is on uh, body, gender, and sexuality in the Genesis lectures. So that Martin
Sounds
Luther
awesome.
Genesis lectures, to be clear.
Thanks,
Yep.
Pace. That's
Yeah.
Yeah,
really
thank you.
helpful.
Yeah,
If you
I want
go,
to
you'll
hear
get to
more.
see there.
for sure. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't help it because it just like felt like such a good fit. Thank you for
Oh,
indulging.
sure, sure. Thank you, Emily.
Speaking of indulging, do you think that dance as magic is indulging? Is witchy? What do you think of witch lore?
Nice, nice.
Ooh,
Did I do it? Did I do it good? Did I do it good?
yeah, great.
Um, it's our witch lore section.
Woo!
So obviously this has a some unique takes on witch lore compared to some of the other movies we have. I'm excited for our retrospective because then we'll get to compile all of our lore and be like, what even is witch?
Mm.
Right.
But I really like and I mentioned this at the beginning, the dancing as magic, um, but then the dream aspects too, which connect to the original Suspiria, but like you can send people dreams and you can do telepathy. And I still don't understand what witness means in their particular group, but when you do send people dreams, that magic at night, like the dream magic, is like your own personal aurora borealis. So,
Mm.
if anyone wants to send me dreams, I have always dreamed of seeing the aurora borealis, so it'd be like a 2-for-1.
I
Great.
love it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome because the imagery in the dreams is very upsetting, but the like glimmer on the wall that they sort of see, I don't know, when it's about to happen or when something witchy is happening, like
Yeah.
I love that idea of their own personal borealis. Like that's very much what it is. So that part of it is
Yeah.
like inviting and nice to look at. And then the dreams are like horrifying.
Yeah, pretty much.
Um,
Yeah.
I
And then
mean, as far, sorry, go
I was just gonna try and make you talk still. Go
ahead.
for it.
I mean, I don't know how this, yeah, I will also be interested in seeing how all of the different witch lore kind of stacks up against each other. But the idea in this is that, or at least this is what Dr. Klemperer says, is the three mothers are said to predate God, the devil, Christianity. So they're these, ancient forces. And there's kind of, again, that question of like, when Susie early on wakes up from one of those dreams,
Mhm.
screaming, "I know who I am." And I think the first time I watched it, I thought that meant like, yeah, that she was sort of staking her identity against what the witches were trying to do to her. But I think you can also definitely read it as her like articulating like, "Oh, I'm Mother Suspiriorum." So yeah, I mean, I don't know how that works in terms of witch lore on the whole is like, does one become a witch through sort of
Choice or practice or birth.
yeah, like how does it work? It
Yeah.
probably works different ways in different stories, but she seems to have sort of been it's like a revelation, but it's also
Yeah.
been building inside of her. I don't know.
That you just like connected some dots for me, John.
Yeah, I did
Mhm,
not get
mhm.
that on the first watch.
Yeah, me either, obviously. Fascinating. Okay. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Um yeah, I alluded to this earlier, but there's that she opens her chest up at the end
Right?
and her heart question mark is in there. Like it's sort of we were talking vulvas earlier. It's definitely like
Right.
Very
there's some
much.
It is.
intentional vaginal imagery, I think, but it's also
Mhm.
like uh, black and beating. So again, it's like
Yep.
if you can read that a couple ways, like if you think she's got this evil black heart, maybe that's that. Maybe it's like her revealing, her kind of empathy or good-heartedness, because from there she sort of spares the people who, you
Yeah.
know, are
It
deserving of being spared.
is very Volvific and also very much like intentionally kind of like the Sacred Heart iconography is
Right.
kind of
Mhm.
inspiring that scene. So it's like there like exactly like you're saying, there's like so many ways to kind of interpret that. It's very fascinating.
Yeah, it's in keeping with all the mother themes that the
Yeah.
Mother Mary image of her heart on her chest like that. Um, I don't know exactly what it means, but I like that it's
Yeah.
in there.
Mhm.
Um, and then I did wonder what you all might have thought. I don't know if you know about the post-credits scene, but
Oh.
she does some kind of spell, like facing the camera, and seems pleased, and then it's a cut to
Oh.
black. Um,
Mhm.
and I looked it up like to see what people's theories are, and there are a lot of theories about what it could mean. Pace, maybe you have some thoughts too, but like where she's positioned seems to be outside of the dance studio, like facing the Berlin Wall. So some people read it as like that's her sort of next step in taking ownership of this new generation that's going to try to do things right, and like sort of blessing, like let this wall come down in the next sort of phase. There's some people who think she's sort of bewitching the audience, like putting a spell on us, like now you will forget all this too, or like now I imbue you with my magic. So I don't know. I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
Again, I didn't even notice that scene was there the first time, so it was a nice
I don't
like
think it let me. I think
surprise.
it auto played some
Yeah,
sort of
Yeah. Yeah.
I
button.
hate that. I hate the like
It's
Right.
so
jump to the next
annoying,
thing. Yeah,
especially when there are like it's annoying. Period. It's extra annoying when there are other scenes.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
And it was from Amazon. Like you'd
right.
think they'd
They could do it
know
right.
their own movie.
Right. Yeah,
Agreed.
I don't have an interpretation for that other than just like, yeah, it's weird, and I like that it's weird without like a
Yeah.
clear understanding of what's happening. Like,
Mm,
I guess like if someone forced me to come up with a reason, I'd be like, oh, maybe it's just adding to the is anything we watch real kind of
yeah, I like
magic
that.
being cast on the viewer. But beyond that, it's like, I don't know. It's fun. It's weird. This whole
Yeah.
movie is fun. It's weird. It's vibes.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely.
So, Susanna, there is, well, I have one witch lore question, but I kind of want to end on that question. But Susanna, I know you had some connections as you're watching about that I think are intentionally there too about the fates, the three fates, and the connection to the three women, the three mothers.
There is a phenomenon where there's so many queers that are really obsessed with Greek mythology in their youth. I don't know why. We just are. Um,
Yep.
anyway, I was one of them, and by seventh grade, I was really obsessed, and I still am. And I'm fascinated with like, but there's this concept of like the three faced woman, the triple goddess, and it is in many different faiths from many different places. A lot of times she takes the face of different phases of the moon. Sometimes she takes the face of maiden, mother, crone. Sometimes she, like in Greek mythology, they are the fates, and I don't know how to pronounce any of the Greek mythology ones, but the one in the middle, Lachesis, I think her name is. It's like Lachesis. But it reminded me of the one mother that was mentioned, like in the spelling, and it felt
Yeah.
like a little like to that. But the fates in Greek mythology, like the one spins the thread, and that's the birth, and then the other one like determines how long it's going to be, and then the other one cuts it. And the casus is the one in the middle, and these fates in Greek mythology anyway are considered like the most powerful of all the gods. Like people are like, oh, Zeus is
Yeah.
the most powerful, but even Zeus was afraid of the fates because nobody could tell them what to do. Nobody told him what's what. Like nobody told them what to do. No. They determined all the things, and you were terrified of them, and they determined fate. And I do think, like I think about what Emily said earlier about, like how is this when it comes to portraying women and covens and stuff. And in this one,
Hmm.
the fates are really neutral in Greek mythology, and in here they're turned into
Yeah.
like these like the most evil, right? And like there's other ones, but they're
Or
all
neutral,
throughout
yeah.
history. So like when I
They
say
flip
like,
it.
is it yet again another dude who has this like fascination slash turn on slash utter complete fear of the triple headed goddess?
Yeah.
It feels like that because there are
Well,
three
it's
mothers,
very,
and
very
the whole thing.
interesting you say that
Maybe
because
they're in the
in
Trinity.
our first episode, we talk about the kind of loose inspiration of the original Suspiria film, which is um, an English writer, Thomas de Quincey, who took a lot of hallucinogenic drugs and then wrote this weird long form poem about the experience. The poem's called Suspiria de Profundis, and it does, in fact, have the same names as the three mothers here for three kind of incarnate mother figures for the author that he experienced while tripping, and also like connecting them specifically and purposefully with the Greek fates. And so then the first Suspiria movie came out, just kind of took some loose reading of that, but kind of doing his own thing with that. And then this one, I think, is another kind of like, what is its relationship with the three fates? How intentional is it? Some really cool questions there.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for bringing that in.
Okay, my question for everybody, though, that is my witch lore slash we'll get into rating after this, is do you think, is this movie, is it possible that this movie and the original Suspiria are set in the same universe, like same reality? Yes or
Oh,
no? And then additionally, like, if not that, at least is it like the same kind of concept of what it means to be witches, or is that distinctly different between the two films? So it's kind of a two-part question, but
ooh.
I mean, I guess I would say it doesn't seem like there's a lot of ambiguity about the witches being evil in the original Suspiria. Maybe I'm
yeah.
wrong, but
No, I
she's
think you're
just
right there.
so yeah. I think Susanna, you were asking earlier about like is like there's no Susie becomes Mother Suspiriorum in the original movie. She just Susie kills Marcos and is like triumphant, and the coven has been defeated, I think is the idea.
Yeah. The last scene
So
is her running out of the coven after just killing, and it just ends right there.
right. So yeah, I guess we don't know exactly what happens, but evil has been defeated is kind of the idea, I
Yeah.
think. And that this one is so much more ambiguous than that. So I don't know. I feel like the
Yeah.
the rules, we were asking like, is this empowerment? Is this what is this? And at least this one is grappling with that in a way
Yeah.
that the kind of black and whiteness of the witches in the last one was not, maybe.
Well,
Or
there's a
Technicolor
thing
red,
that
green, blue, and yellowness.
there's a
Right.
thing
Yeah,
that really
exactly.
Colorblindness.
like bugs me, that really, like, it's not that big deal, but like it really like says a lot to me, and that it is intentionally said in the movie. And I think from what I could read of other reviews of the other movie, that they intentionally say three mothers who predate
Hmm.
Christianity. Like, specifically say predate Christianity. Like, and that is really a big flag for me. That's a really big flag for me. Because there's a lot of history about how Christianity came and then, had a major head to head with various flavors of pagan faiths in various parts of the
Yeah.
world, and then would take those faiths and make them into something evil. Uh, So, like, for me, it feels like when they say predates Christianity, it feels like yet another thing, like what Emily was saying, right? Another thing where you talk about an ancient power that is female in nature, aka before Christianity. If it's ancient, if it's pre-Christianity, if it's female, it's bad, y'all. It's some
Right.
bad
Yeah.
news. And that is like a vibe that's in a lot of movies on a lot of supernatural topics. It's ancient, it's female, it's bad news. So, like,
Yeah.
eh,
Yeah. There's a book that I'll recommend that I love that kind of talks about this from like historic, what everything Suzanne was saying from like historic, theoretical, and um, standpoint, called When God Was a Woman by Merlin Stone. Great book that kind of talks about a lot of this. And then also, well, this is a long episode. Okay, I'll really, really quick say that even in the Christianity, even in Christianity's understanding, and perhaps even in the Hebrew origin story, own self-understanding of the creation myth, so many of the creation myths have a feminine kind of something that um, gives that a male has to tame in order to create the earth.
Mm.
And in the Old Testament Genesis story, it's a formless void, but God is able to tame it not through a battle as it is in so many others, but through just speech and the word and like speaking. And so like what that says about kind of like these, when you put it in the context of like a gendered reading of that, like what is that saying about a male God who can just completely create a feminine something with just word and not even a battle with her? And so the narratives that predate Christianity having more of a battle ensuing between the feminine and masculine conceptions of God. So it's just very interesting. Um, but we
I
need to, oh yeah, please, Emily, answer the question.
I have a very
Sorry.
anxious pupper in the background, so if you hear
Yeah.
whining, I promise it's not me, it's Bailey because her sister is going for a WALK with Papa. Um, I think that it is possible for them to be in the same universe.
Yeah.
I think they have different understandings of magic, though.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I was
Because I
wondering,
think the
especially.
I think that's where they could diverge of like, and maybe
Yeah.
it's yeah, I think there's just a very different way of understanding magic, and I think it's interesting to think about it as like the original coming out like occurring earlier in 77 or whatever, and this one then occurring later and into 78 kind of thing, that like there's some of the like deep evil that happens in the original that
Mm.
then is like still playing out
Hmm.
in the contemporary things that are happening in the background and in the stuff.
Yeah.
And
That's
that's
interesting.
Yeah.
that's
I
my
think,
made up theory.
yeah, I like it. I like it. I think to answer that question too, I think is that I can see like there can be a possibility where two things can be true at once. And so like perhaps they can both kind of be two different contemporaneous enactments of the same kind of trauma, violence, and power struggles, kind of played out in two different simultaneous human narratives or experiences. And so I think that can be possible. And so I think that can be true. And so I think that can be possible. 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 And so and generational traumas and all that stuff. But when you say that the magic is different, I think that does give me pause. I will say though that the Marcos in both the original and this movie are like the closest thing that's related in how it's portrayed as like kind of feeding off the energy of the ballet dancers
Mhm.
for various evils and things.
I don't
Like that weird scene in the original when it's all the red curtains and all the girls are sleeping in the same room, and then
Yeah.
Marcos is just snoring in shadow behind them, like behind the curtains, like feeding off their collective energy.
I will say I don't think like I think the magic is different. I don't know that like necessarily the universe magic is
Yeah,
different,
yeah,
but like the particular stories, the way and I think I mean we could think about it as religions too, right? Like the way that all of the different religions relate to the divine is different. Does that make the divine
yeah,
completely separate, or is the
exactly.
divine some other
Yeah,
thing
yeah.
that these are just pieces of? And I think
Hmm,
that's
hmm.
more what I was kind of going
Yeah, I
for.
love that. I love
It's
that.
just a different denomination, but
Yeah, there we
they're
go.
doing the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. It's the evangelical covenant.
Yes. Yeah,
The-
make them the evil ones.
I love it.
But I mean, there's just it's hard for me to ignore. It's in so many traditions. Like it's not just the fates. Like there's a
Yeah.
lot of like Eastern. I mean, like he who shall not be named, who wrote American Gods, also touched on this. You know, like these like Eastern or more Slavic traditions, particularly Polish traditions, make it three, where you have the morning star, the afternoon, the midnight star, and the evening star, which is really Venus. The same star. It just moves
Yeah.
around. So like there's just so many traditions of an ancient triple
Hmm.
female
Yeah.
power that
And
exists before Christianity, and clearly he's terrified of them.
well, and also clearly inspiring an aspect of Christianity
Both,
that is
yeah.
different from most other
Mm.
uh traditions that call themselves monotheistic, which is
Mm-hmm.
this weird Trinitarianism that one thing can be three at the same time. And especially how things like Sophia in the Hebrew Bible, and
I'm so
which
glad
is
you're talking about
wisdom,
it. I
and
was
like
hoping you were
stuff
gonna
like
go
that are
there.
all kind of
Yes.
seen as like feminine or
Yeah.
women interpretations of the divine or forms of the divine.
right.
So
Which
like
then
it's part
like
of this
Jesus
tradition
as
too,
the
which is
word of
interesting.
Jesus as the word of
Yeah,
God, logos, and that combination of Sophia and logos, and
yeah,
I love it.
yep, yep. So let us rate this film, and we'll rate it out of 10 red, painted, bloody, however you interpret it, shoes. And you can also share your favorite kill. So we'll start with our guest if you want to start, but you can have one of us go if you prefer.
Sure. I am mostly relieved that you all enjoyed this because I was going into this like, am I going to have to defend this movie? Because I don't know if I totally can defend everything about it, but
Yeah,
I don't know. It really worked for me this time. So I'm going 9 out of 10 bloody
love it.
toes. Yeah, like I said, I wasn't totally sure what to make of it the first time. It's very like over the top. There's a lot of different themes to synthesize that I wasn't really processing, but I think really, and we'll get to this with maybe does it pass the test, the HNAC test? Like it's really satisfying to watch Susie's journey once you know where it's headed. So I think that kind of made me appreciate it a lot more this time. Um, I don't know if it pulls everything off. I don't know exactly what it's saying about everything, but I really admire the big swings that it takes. So that's kind of my concluding thought. But favorite kill, there's not actually that many kills because
Hmm.
the three students are left in this horrifying liminal state.
Zombie
They're
thing,
not
yeah.
actually dead. So if you count Olga, who's kind of like the human pretzel, um, that would be the best kill for me. It's such a disturbing and like
Yeah,
I hadn't seen anything like that kind of scene before. And we were talking about the dancers who were in this. She was a dancer. The actress played Olga, who was a contortionist, so she
yeah.
was doing a lot of that stuff for real. Um, so that's definitely the most memorable sort of scene of violence to me in this one. But if we're going for actual kill, I'd say it's a 9-way tie for the matrons whose heads are exploded
Yeah.
at the end. Yeah.
That's a great one.
I love that it's not exploded, it's exploded.
Yeah, it's strong bad style.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love
Um,
it.
I can go next
Oh
because
wow.
yeah, mostly I can go next because then Bailey's probably gonna see somebody coming back and freak out. I will give it, and this is like a testament to this conversation a lot. Um, which is usually my rating. So that's part of why, John, I don't write my rating down until
Sure.
we're like here, and then I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
this is what I give it. I'm actually giving it a 7, which is higher than I
Mhm.
thought I would. Um, and a little bit is anticipating if I were to watch it again, it would be a higher rating than just the original because of the, oh, now I get
Right.
XYZ.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, but so I'm giving it a 7 because it does some new things in ways that I think are really helpful compared to the original. And I really like the thinking that it and the possibilities of like, is it this? Is it this? That happen to let it be complicated without just a clean box. Like there's a certain amount of like wrapping it up with a bow, but there's also another part that like it's not just clean cut perfect endings.
Yeah.
Um, and the way I'm going to do favorite kills is the most disturbing, powerful. I agree, Olga all the way.
Yeah.
But my
Mhm.
favorite is Mother Marcos because holy fuck, she is just
It's a
whoa.
good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I will rate this. Okay, I'll rate it a 9. I think
Okay.
each time I watch it, I like it more.
Yeah.
And in spite of even this time, like when I had a little bit of pacing issues with it, of just like kind of coming out of it, it's still like each time I watch it, there's just something new I notice. I change my interpretation a little, or like it's just one of those movies I think has a high rewatch value. And I'm surprised I've only watched it 3 times. Probably just because it's like a commitment to sit through
Two
the
and
movie
a
in one
half
sitting.
plus
I mean,
hours.
also like I watch The Shining like once a quarter probably, and that's the 2.5 hour long movie. So like, but yeah, um, my favorite. So yeah, 9 out of 10, bloodied ballet shoes. Favorite kill, I will say Sarah, even though like that liminal state thing, but like just that whole scene in the mirror room and how it's kind of like a interesting companion to like the barbed wire death of the original, and just I really like the visual of that scene, and the cutting back between the dance and the mirror room death flinging around kind of thing. So,
Wait, is that Olga or Sarah?
oh, Olga, yes,
Okay, I
sorry,
was like
agreeing
Sarah's.
with you all, Olga.
Yeah, but that
Oh,
would.
hold on. Okay,
Yeah.
whoops. I have to go back. I have to change it.
Oh, sorry, Susanna.
This
Yes,
is very
Olga, I'm
official.
glad you.
We're gonna take it down and then we're gonna put it on
Sarah,
YouTube before it gets
Sarah's,
lost.
yeah, Sarah. I was initially thinking Sarah, which is how I got confused, but you all reminded me of Olga, and yes, that's such a good death. Sarah in the hallway, there was an aspect of that death I liked, which is just kind of the you don't you assume she dies, but then she comes back. So there's that like weird sense of is she did she actually die in that scene, or we just led to believe it because it kind of happens off screen with this
Right.
kill, but then there is she actually is kind of dead or maybe not dead. So yes, I
Yeah.
love Sarah's death too for that reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's it. But I am curious, does this pass our HNAC test, which is a reminder for our
Wait,
audience,
I
viewers, and
want to rate.
listeners?
Can I
Oh,
rate?
yes, of course, Susanna, always.
I'll be really fast. Okay.
No, we're not
I
rushing. Pace is
don't.
just ADHD.
No, it's fine, baby. I understand completely. I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to go with 6.5. I love the
Go for
dance.
it.
I love the mom stuff. I love all of the things. But like, there could have been so much done with this coven and energy and ancient power that predates Christianity that was far more interesting than just making them evil and power hungry. Like I felt like, oh, you missed out on an incredible timeless, like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, that just makes me so sad, you know?
Yeah.
So like I guess yeah, that's how I felt about it. And I'm just gonna have to go with like Olga the same as the rest of you because like it was just too good. Like the idea of being teach me. Okay, I want to know the dance that will make my enemies crumble. Like teach me. Like, and I just did a whole podcast saying that women aren't necessarily ruthless when they have power, but here I am like, teach me. Well, I would love for that. I haven't seen many films that have really encapsulated like how dance as a ritual is energy producing. Like I've seen a lot about how it's energy depleting, but I haven't seen anything like talk about the power of physical, bodily, embodied movement in a group is. So I couldn't go any lower than 6.5, and I did a half. So I am the one who's pretentious. Who caused
the half a bloody point shoe.
Yes, and I always make my half little iconography like really pretentious and loud, so it moves like 5 times as fast as the
I think
other
I am gonna have to start rewatching just so that I can catch the ratings on Facebook.
Oh, I wasn't really super great at them. Like this is the first time I've been really good at like I would get down.
I saw your half of a whatever book that one time.
Yeah, I'm getting better at it. I've got a tombstone for everybody. I line you all up at the top. You get a tombstone, your favorite kill in the tombstone, and then underneath, you know, creepy little dancing things.
That's awesome.
So, I have no good transition, but does it pass the HNAC test? So, as a reminder for folks, the HNAC test, there are kind of 2 levels to it. The first level is it requires a redemption arc of some sort for at least one character. But if the redemption results in death, like if the way that the character redeems themselves ends up they die, then it fails. If, however, they have a redemption arc and there's actual like evidence that they are trying to fix the mistakes or repair the harm, then it super passes. So it can pass and it can super pass. Kind of like pass with a majority and a super majority, you know, to take some political terms. Mm-hmm. So, does it pass the HNAC test?
I mean, you tell me, but I feel like there's definitely an argument to be made that it passes or even super passes for Susie / Mother Superiorum.
Mm-hmm.
She's manipulative, though, even to the end, regardless of her intentions. So, like, whether you read her as a force for good, who's like is redeeming things by giving people mercy and righting some wrongs, or is the ultimate evil taking her place? Like, I don't know, but I mean, yeah. What do you think?
Well, and I think like it's interesting because usually what we mean by if the like redemption involves death,
right?
The majority of the time, it's because that person like dies themselves,
sacrifices themselves, right?
Sacrifice himself. But in this case, the death as redemption is the mercy of killing the 3 women who have been in torment the whole time.
Yeah.
And that one feels more complicated to me. It feels very easy for me to say that Susie and the psychiatrist does pass if we're looking at the kind of like the coven as a whole, right? The way the coven has interacted with him has been very harmful, and this is a like coming back from that, and a trying to repair some of that harm. The fact that it involves forgetting, I'm not thrilled about.
Yeah.
The fact that the mercy is killing them,
right.
I'm also not thrilled about.
Yeah.
Right? Those are the things I'm not thrilled about, but I think technically it still passes.
Yeah. It's does it count as redemption if it involves like murdering a bunch of people? I don't know.
I mean, what do you think, Pace? Or Susanna, if you
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the forgetting thing changes the psychiatrist, my opinion on him.
mm-hmm.
Beyond that, like, yes, no, both. It's vibes. I can't really like it's a
How
little bit of
do vibes
everything.
pass a test?
Yeah, exactly.
It is funny though the way that you all frame that test. Like I knew how you had worded it, and so watching it this time, I was like, oh, like surprisingly, almost like easily in some ways. But it's obviously like a really complicated version of it. But like
Yeah,
there is a version of it that like
for
maybe
sure.
passes more easily than a lot of movies.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, it's been amazing the number of movies that don't pass.
Yeah.
I just read Fire, and Fire, there's a part in Fire that does not pass.
Mhm.
And there's parts that do. But I was like, hey, this one is an example of failing. And I was like, this is just a
Hmm.
book. This is
Right.
not a movie. This is not any of those. But that trope is always in there of the way we redeem ourselves is by a sacrificial death.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. Yeah. Do you have an opinion, Susanna, on if it passes? Or if we have to give a definitive answer? Ish.
Yeah. I said vibes.
Pace's answer was vibes. John's answer was yes,
Yes, if maybe.
my answer is yes, but I'm not thrilled about some of it.
Yeah, fair.
That's okay. That's a
That's
great
fine.
answer too.
I think that's the answer to a lot of this movie. I don't know.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
All of any of them. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and that's where I went with like the coven as a whole and how it shifts under the leadership. That
Mhm.
like the new leadership starts to do the repairing of the harm for the coven on behalf of the coven.
Mhm.
Well, with the psychiatrist is what it like. I don't love that they then make him forget everything, but she does start to try and repair some of the harm of the things they said about his wife by telling the truth.
But then making him forget the truth.
It's starting to repair the harm. I don't know. Like that's why I
Well,
said
that's the
yes,
question. Like,
but I'm not
maybe,
thrilled about
maybe
it.
not. I like your answer. I
All
like
right.
that. Yeah, that's fair. Um, love
All
it.
right.
That's good.
That's
That's
fair.
good. We got all answers represented,
Big no
even
for me.
non-answers represented.
Vibes. Yeah. Jump scares. This is the part of the movie, the episode, where we reveal how many jump scares we jumped. Um,
Wait. Did we say what John's was?
yeah. John was
What? Oh
enthusiastic.
Lord.
I think mine
Yeah.
is yes if dot dot dot.
Yes, if.
Okay. All right. Cool. I just want to make
Yeah.
sure because
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
a no, and I
Yeah.
like I'm getting my graphics right for posterity. Okay.
Thank you.
Good.
I like that our gamut of answers kind of reflects this movie. Like it's not
Yes.
clear cut.
Good
But-
point. Oh, good
Yeah.
point.
It's like we made the perfect pie graph where it's a personal size 4-slice pizza.
It's true.
Yes.
It's true.
I mean, I put a couple jump scare possibilities in there.
Did you
It's
have a jump scare though?
Yeah, I mean, I
Okay.
think Sarah in the chambers, the Moocher house in the basement, uh, finding like the withered Patricia, like when she turns around and you see she's
Okay.
still like alive, it's like, oh, I think I did do a little bit of a jump there.
Yeah.
And then maybe, we were talking about Dr. Klemper, the psychiatrist, like goes on this walk with who he thinks is his
Yeah.
wife, and then she disappears, and then one of the witches runs out from the studio straight at him and like drags him in. Like that's a little bit of a jump too. So I don't know. Those were a couple that I had.
That makes sense. I had like half a jump scare, which is to say, audibly, it was a jump scare, but I did not actually move my body in relationship to it. So I had a half a jump scare with the partial beheading of Madame Blanc because
Yes.
that
Nice.
just
That's a good one.
came out of nowhere for me, and I was like,
Yeah, fair enough. It's funny because the original movie has a lot of jump scares, and this one is like almost none. Like it's real
Mhm.
slow burn.
yeah. I've started to like develop an understanding of the tropes and like how horror movies work. So now I'm curious when we get to like an actual jump scary movie, if I'll have
It's
lots of
coming when
jump
we
scares.
do our Exorcist season. Just wait. Exorcist 3. The most
Uh,
famous, infamous
yes,
jump scare ever.
yes, indeed.
I mean, back in the day, I jump scared at the click of the knob in The Ring. The first and second times I saw it.
It's scary.
Hmm.
The knob, it just clicks as it
Yep.
turns.
Yeah,
But that was
I'm with you.
scary.
It's scary.
Hmm.
Anyway.
Well, I of course didn't have any, but not like I just I don't know. I could see the jump scares happening, but like I'm curious when we get to ones that still like get me in a jump scare way, like Exorcist 3. Even it's even worse now, I think, when you know it's coming and you still jump at it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I honestly did not jump scare at all. I just
Yeah.
was like entranced and confused.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
so,
It's
like
a very
during the
entrancing and confusing movie.
yeah, because like the dance
God.
that pretzeled Olga, like I was like, ooh, I'm here for this dance and the power that it's emitting. I love this
Mhm.
display. Ouch, that hurts. Ouch, ouch. That's really
Yeah, how many
creepy.
ouch scares probably if you
Right,
if
it
your
was more
body
like it
horror.
wasn't like a jump. It was like a it was like
Yeah.
a twitch. It was a twitch
Yeah.
scare.
I like
Yeah.
it. That's good.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have
The
to start adding Twitch scares to the repertoire
Yeah,
of
the
answers
more
to this
the
question.
more you get me calloused to
It's true.
this, the more you get me used to it, I may jump less and twitch more.
That's fair. That's fair.
It's a good rubric.
So, John, where can our listeners and watchers find you?
Sure. They can find me at John G. Potter on Instagram. You can find me mainly behind the scenes editing, but also writing sometimes at Living Lutheran, including editing pieces like Pace is Great, piece on Martin Luther and
Thanks.
horror movies.
Mhm.
Yeah, I yes have a dormant podcast that we alluded to called Magnified Pod that may or may not come back to life at some point, but that's what I'm doing.
Love
Nice.
it.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for being a guest. This was
Yeah.
fun.
Thank you all so much. I feel like I made us go super long with all my
No,
We
notes, but
You're a
you not
fan. You
listened?
listen.
I thought you
Like
said you
we're always
listened to
super
us.
long.
oh, I know,
We
I
do
know. I'm
that.
like, I don't
We
feel
do
that bad
that.
about it.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Exactly.
no, this
This
was
was fantastic.
so great. Thank you all so much for having me.
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
thanks for being with us.
Well, we have two possibilities for our next movie because it depends. River, our dear friend and friend of the podcast, is also doctoraling stuff and in a stressive moment. So next, depending on where things land, maybe Practical Magic with special guest River Cook Needham. If not, we'll probably do the next chronologically we have in the list, which would be Blair Witch. So one of those two will be
My thing.
next.
Exciting.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Well, that's it for this episode. Our theme music was by Matt May. Our super witchy techie magic was by, Susanna Porter. We release seasonally with a live video on every other Tuesday evening and our audio coming to your favorite podcast provider at some point. Please comment, rate, and subscribe to us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Support us on Patreon. You get really cool things like BootTube episodes where I cover TV shows. This you already heard Emily and Suzanne talk about American Horror Story Coven. Season 3 of that show going to be one of those, but a lot of other cool stuff. So it starts at only $5 a month, so significantly cheaper than what I imagine room and board would have been at the dance studio had it not been provided for the students. Um, Follow us on socials, Facebook and Insta at Horror Nerds at Church. Blue Sky Twitter, HNACPOD. That's where we post all of our latest updates about upcoming films, news, stuff like that. Until next time, let's break the nose of every beautiful thing.
Amen.
Amen. Bye, everyone.